The rope swayed gently in the morning breeze, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped the crowd gathered in Copper Gulch's dusty Main Street. Wyatt Callahan stood at the edge of the throng, his weathered hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much. The scaffold creaked under the weight of the condemned man, whose hands trembled against the bindings at his wrists. Sheriff Mills cleared his throat, unfolding a yellowed paper with practiced solemnity. By the authority vested in me by the Arizona Territory, I hereby sentence Jonas Fletcher to death by hanging for the crimes of murder and horse theft. The crowd murmured its approval. Justice was a simple equation in these parts, a life for a life, property for property. The condemned man's eyes darted frantically across the faces below, searching for mercy, where none existed until they locked with Wyatt's. A silent plea passed between them, an unspoken recognition. Wyatt knew that look. He'd worn it himself once. The hangman adjusted the noose with calloused hands. Fletcher's lips moved in desperate whispers that only Wyatt somehow could hear. "I didn't do it. Please help me." Wyatt's hand drifted unconsciously to the scar that circled his own neck, a permanent reminder hidden beneath his collar. His jaw tightened. For a moment, something stirred within him, a flicker of what he used to be before the war, before Daniel, before everything. Then he turned away. The scaffold trap door creaked open, followed by the sharp snap of rope pulled taut. The crowd's collective gasp faded behind Wyatt as he walked toward his horse. He didn't need to look back. He knew the sound of justice too well. "This West has no place for mercy anymore," he muttered to himself, swinging into the saddle. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, seemed eager to leave town, matching his master's sentiment with every hoofbeat that carried them into the vast emptiness of the Arizona desert. Boom! The desert stretched before Wyatt like an ocean of sand and scrub painted in hues of amber and rust beneath the merciless sun. Copper's rhythmic gait had long since fallen into the familiar pattern that had carried them across countless miles together. The horse knew the way home without guidance, leaving Wyatt's mind free to wander where it shouldn't. It was in these moments of solitude that the memories came unbidden, sharp as the day they were forged. The thunderous roar of cannon fire, the acrid smell of gunpowder. And always, Daniel's face, his older brother pushing him down, as the bullet meant for Wyatt tore through Daniel's chest instead. "Get down, little brother." The memory of Daniel's voice echoed across time, followed by the wet gurgle that replaced words as blood filled his lungs. Wyatt blinked away the vision, focusing instead on the horizon where his small ranch awaited. It wasn't much a simple cabin, a modest corral, a lean-to for Copper, but it was his. In a world where a man's worth was measured by the land he held and the battles he'd survived, Wyatt had carved out just enough to keep living, if not enough to call it a life. As the cabin came into view, Wyatt noted with satisfaction that everything remained as he'd left it. In these parts, an unattended homestead often became an invitation for squatters or thieves. But something about Wyatt Callahan's reputation kept most trouble at bay. Those who knew him knew to leave him be. Dismounting outside the cabin, Wyatt removed Copper's saddle with practiced efficiency, running a hand along the horse's flank in silent appreciation. Inside the cabin was sparse but meticulously ordered, a soldier's precision, evident in the arrangement of every tin cup and folded blanket. Wyatt moved to a small chest tucked beneath his bed, extracting a bottle of whiskey in a tarnished silver frame. The photograph inside showed 4 people, a stern-faced man with proud eyes, a beautiful woman with a distant smile, a young man in his early 20s with an arm slung protectively around a teenage boy. The Callahan family before the world had torn them apart. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, raising it in a silent toast to the image, before taking a slow-burning sip. The ritual complete, he set the frame back in its place and moved to the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. Loosening his collar, Wyatt examined the scar that circled his neck, like a grotesque necklace, the mark of a hangman's noose that had failed in its purpose. His fingers traced the raised tissue, remembering the bite of hemp, the terror of falling, the miraculous snap of rope that had left him alive when he should have died. Some called it luck. Wyatt called it a sentence of a different kind. The following afternoon found Wyatt riding Copper along the boundaries of his modest property. He didn't own much land, just enough to graze a few cattle and maintain his isolation, but he guarded it with the vigilance of a man who had lost everything once before. The day was unusually still. The typical desert breeze absent, leaving an eerie silence, broken only by Copper's footfalls. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned their songs, creating a vacuum of sound that put Wyatt's senses on high alert. In his experience, such silence rarely preceded anything good. "What do you think, boy?" he murmured to the horse, whose ears had pricked forward, sensing something his master could not. "Something ain't right." They crested a small rise, and that's when Wyatt spotted it, a wagon tilted awkwardly in the distance, one wheel broken and splintered. Even from this distance, he could see dark stains in the sand around it. Blood. Caution warred with curiosity as Wyatt approached his hand resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. The wagon was expensive, well-built, with the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of Easter money. No supplies littered the ground around it, not ransacked then, but abandoned. The blood trail led from the wagon into a nearby cluster of rocks. Wyatt followed it, every sense heightened, until he found her. She lay crumpled between two boulders, wrists bound with rope that had cut deep enough to draw blood. Her dress, once fine blue silk, now torn and dust-covered, revealed bruises blooming across her exposed skin. Dark hair matted with blood partially obscured a face that, even in this state, carried an unmistakable dignity. Wyatt knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. A faint pulse fluttered beneath his fingers as he touched her neck. Her eyes flickered open, striking blue, clouded with pain, but somehow still alert and fixed on his face with desperate intensity. "Save me," she whispered, each word costing precious strength. "Please." Those simple words froze Wyatt where he knelt. They were too familiar an echo of the condemned man from town of himself years ago, when the rope had failed to clone him, always the same plea falling on deaf ears. He hesitated, one hand hovering over his knife. The smart thing would be to walk away. Whatever trouble this woman carried wasn't his to shoulder. The desert was full of tragedy, and one man couldn't stem that tide. But her eyes held his unwavering despite her pain. And in that moment, something long dormant stirred in Wyatt Callahan's chest, a remnant of the man he'd been before war, and betrayal had hardened him. With a swift motion, he cut through the ropes, binding her wrists, revealing raw, bleeding flesh beneath. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gruff from disuse. She tried to rise but collapsed immediately, her body betraying her will. Without further hesitation, Wyatt gathered her into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed despite her height. She smelled of expensive perfume beneath the metallic tang of blood and the dust of the desert. "I've got you," he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. How long had it been since he had offered comfort to another human being? As he carried her back to Copper, her head lolled against his shoulder, her consciousness slipping away. Wyatt mounted, carefully cradling her before him as he turned toward home, acutely aware that whatever solitude he'd cultivated was now shattered. The woman stirred against him, her breath warm against his neck. "Thank you," she murmured, before surrendering again to darkness. Wyatt said nothing but urged Copper into a gentle trot. The desert stretched vast around them, indifferent to the small drama unfolding across its surface. And somewhere in the distance, Wyatt sensed trouble was already riding hard to catch up. Night had fallen by the time Wyatt carried the unconscious woman into his cabin. He laid her carefully on his bed, the only one he had, and lit the oil lamp, casting warm, flickering light across the small space. In the improved illumination, he could better assess her injuries. Though numerous, none appeared life-threatening. The worst was a gash along her hairline that had bled profusely but was already clotting. Her wrists were raw from the rope bindings, and bruises in various stages of development mottled her arms and what he could see of her collarbone. Whoever had done this had taken their time inflicting pain methodically. Wyatt gathered water-clean cloths and the small supply of medical items he kept, remnants of his army days, when field medicine often meant the difference between life and death. He hesitated at the bedside, uncomfortable with the intimacy required to tend to her wounds. "Ma'am," he said, his voice louder than intended in the quiet cabin. "Ma'am, I need to clean your injuries." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. With a sigh, Wyatt gently began cleaning the blood from her face, movements precise and impersonal as he worked. By the time he finished bandaging her wrists, dawn was approaching, gray light seeping through the cabin's single window. Exhausted, Wyatt settled into the wooden chair beside the bed, intending to rest just for a moment. Instead, he found himself studying the woman's face, relaxed now in sleep. Even bruised and battered, there was no denying her beauty, the kind that opened doors and turned heads in places far more civilized than this dusty corner of Arizona. His eyes grew heavy and he drifted into uneasy sleep, only to be startled awake by a soft gasp. The woman was awake, blue eyes wide with momentary panic as she took in unfamiliar surroundings. "You're safe," Wyatt said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I found you in the desert. Your wagon was broken." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by visible relief. "The wagon? Yes." Her voice was cultured Eastern in its cadence. She attempted to sit up, wincing at the movement. "Best stay still," Wyatt advised. "You took quite a beating." She nodded, settling back against the pillow. "May I know the name of my rescuer?" "Wyatt Callahan." "Mr. Callahan." She tested the name, then offered a wan smile. "I'm Abigail Harper." The name struck Wyatt like a physical blow. Harper. Of all the names in the territory, it had to be that one. His expression must have betrayed him because wariness crept into her gaze. "You recognize my name." It wasn't a question. Wyatt stood abruptly, moving to the small stove to busy his hands with making coffee, his back to her. Most folks around here know the Harper name, he said neutrally. My father is Ezra Harper, she confirmed, watching him closely. Wyatt's hand tightened on the coffee pot. Ezra Harper, man who owned half the territory, whose cattle grazed on land that stretched beyond the horizon, whose name was spoken with equal measures of respect and fear. The man who had once been his father's partner and friend before everything fell apart. You're a long way from Harperland, he observed, keeping his voice steady. Not by choice, Abigail's voice hardened. I was taken against my will 3 days ago. Wyatt turned to face her, coffee forgotten. Kidnapped, she nodded, fingers unconsciously touching the bandages on her wrists. 3 men, they demanded ransom from my father. A bitter laugh escaped her. He refused to pay. Wyatt's brow furrowed. Ezra Harper was many things, but he'd never heard the man was the type to abandon his own flesh and blood. He refused. My father doesn't negotiate with criminals, she said, and Wyatt couldn't tell if the emotion in her voice was pride or resentment. He believed they would kill me regardless. So they decided to make an example of you instead. Abigail's eyes lowered. Not exactly. When the ransom failed, they changed their plans. She swallowed hard. They were taking me to a man named Solomon Pierce. He wanted me to sign over my inheritance rights. The name pierced through Wyatt's carefully constructed walls. Solomon Pierce, a name he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. The wealthy businessman who had partnered with both Harper and Wyatt's father in the early days before the silver mine, before the accusations, before his father's suicide. Why would Pierce want your inheritance? Wyatt asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. There's a silver mine on Harper land, Abigail said. My father discovered it years ago with his former partner. They kept it secret, but somehow Pierce found out. She paused. Do you know him? You seem affected by the name. Wyatt turned back to the stove, pouring the now boiling coffee into 2 tin cups. We've crossed paths, he said, simply handing her a cup. Rest now. We'll talk more later. Abigail accepted the coffee with a nod, clearly sensing his reluctance to elaborate. As she sipped the bitter brew, her free hand moved to a pendant hanging from a chain around her neck, a small gold locket that had somehow survived her ordeal. Wyatt's eyes caught the movement, and when Abigail drifted back to sleep, the coffee cup empty beside her, he approached quietly. The locket had fallen open on the pillow beside her head, revealing a small daguerreotype inside the stern face of Ezra Harper, looking much as Wyatt remembered him, though with more gray in his beard and deeper lines around his eyes. Something twisted in Wyatt's gut as he looked from the image to the sleeping woman. She was Ezra Harper's daughter, which made her the enemy by blood, if nothing else. The smart move would be to get her well enough to travel, then send her back to her father with no further involvement. But as he stood in the quiet cabin, moonlight streaming through the window and casting silver across Abigail's sleeping form, words from long ago echoed in his memory, his father's voice breaking with emotion as he pressed a folded paper into Wyatt's young hands. Swear to me, son. Swear you'll never trust a Harper. They'll smile while they stab you in the back. Wyatt had sworn then, a boy's solemn oath to a father destroyed by betrayal. He'd kept that promise through war and peace, carrying it like a talisman against a world determined to break him. I swore I would never help a Harper, he whispered to the silent cabin. But she isn't to blame for her father's sins. In the stillness, Wyatt made his decision. He would help Abigail Harper recover, then send her back to her father, not out of any loyalty to Ezra, but because it was the right thing to do. And perhaps, just perhaps, because it was what Daniel would have done. Outside, the desert night wrapped around the small cabin, indifferent to the conflict raging within its walls. And far away, unseen, but felt the first stirrings of a coming storm gathered strength. The next morning, Abigail was strong enough to sit up and share a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee. She ate with surprising appetite for someone who had been through such an ordeal, resilience that Wyatt found himself reluctantly admiring. You mentioned 3 men, he said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Any chance they're still looking for you? Abigail set down her cup, her expression darkening. Almost certainly. They wouldn't abandon their plan so easily, especially with what's at stake. The silver mine, Wyatt said. She nodded. Not just the mine. My father's entire holdings. I'm his only child and heir. A shadow crossed her face. My mother disappeared 10 years ago. Father says she died, but I've never believed it. Wyatt's interest sharpened. Why not? She left no body, no goodbye, just vanished one day. Abigail's fingers found the locket again, a habitual gesture. Father forbade me from speaking of her, built a memorial stone with her name, and expected me to accept she was gone. And you didn't. Would you? She challenged, eyes flashing with unexpected fire. Without proof, without closure. Before Wyatt could respond, Copper's anxious whinny split the morning quiet. In an instant, he was on his feet, moving to the window with practiced caution. A single rider approached from the east, taking no pains to conceal his approach. "Stay inside," Wyatt instructed, checking that his Colt was loaded before stepping onto the small porch, positioning himself so the cabin wall protected his back. The rider drew closer, and Wyatt's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. The man sat tall in the saddle, lean and weathered, with a distinctive scar running from his left eye down to his jaw. Victor Reed, former corporal in the Union Army, assigned to the same unit as Wyatt and Daniel during those final bloody months of the war. The man whose betrayal had led to Daniel's death. Reed reined his horse to a stop 20 yards from the cabin, a smirk playing across his scarred face. "Well, well, Wyatt Callahan. Heard you had a little place out here, but I had to see it with my own eyes." "You're trespassing, Reed," Wyatt replied coldly. Reed's smirk widened. "That's no way to greet an old comrade in arms." His gaze shifted to the cabin behind Wyatt. "I'm looking for something that belongs to me and my associates, a package that got misplaced in the desert." "Nothing here belongs to you." "No." Reed dismounted, his movements casual but purposeful. "Tall woman, dark hair, expensive dress. Ring any bells, Callahan?" His hand rested near the revolver at his hip. "She was supposed to die out there in the sand. My employer won't be pleased to hear she survived." "Your employer?" Wyatt's voice was flat. "Solomon Pierce, I take it." A flicker of surprise crossed Reed's face. "The ladies have been talking, has she?" "Doesn't matter. Hand her over and maybe I'll forget I saw you." "Like you forgot about Daniel." The words escaped before Wyatt could stop them, charged with years of suppressed rage. Reed's expression hardened. "Ancient history, Callahan. Your brother was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nothing personal about it. It was plenty personal to me." The air between them crackled with tension. Reed's fingers twitched near his gun. "Don't make this difficult. The woman comes with me or things get unpleasant." "They already are," Wyatt replied. Reed drew first, but Wyatt had been anticipating the move. Both men fired nearly simultaneously. Reed's bullet splintered the porch post beside Wyatt's head, while Wyatt's shot caught the other man in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. Reed recovered quickly, diving behind a water trough as Wyatt sought cover at the corner of the cabin. Shots rang out in rapid succession, kicking up dust and wood splinters but finding no flesh. "You always were a decent shot," Reed called out during a lull in the firing. "But you're outnumbered, Callahan. My men will be here by sundown." "Then I suggest you go meet them," Wyatt replied, "while you still can." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Then Wyatt heard movement, the scrape of boots against dirt, the creak of saddle leather down. Reed was retreating to his horse. "This isn't over," Reed shouted as he swung onto his mount, blood darkening the sleeve of his shirt. "I'll be back with enough men to burn this place to the ground. And when I find that woman, I'll make sure she suffers extra just for you." Wyatt stepped from cover, rifle raised, but Reed was already galloping away, bent low over his horse's neck to present a smaller target. Wyatt considered taking the shot, but lowered his weapon. Let Reed run. He'd find him again when the time was right. Inside the cabin, Abigail stood by the window, her face pale but composed. "You know him," she said as Wyatt entered, more statement than question. "Victor Reed," Wyatt confirmed, checking his gun before holstering it. "We served together in the war. He betrayed our unit to the Confederates. My brother died in the ambush." Understanding dawned in Abigail's eyes. "And now he works for Pierce." "Seems that way." Wyatt began gathering supplies, moving with urgent efficiency. He wasn't bluffing about bringing men. "We need to leave now." "Where will we go?" "Sycamore Springs. It's a day's ride east. There's a sheriff there I trust." Wyatt paused, fixing her with a steady gaze. "Reed mentioned an employer. How does Solomon Pierce fit into all this?" Abigail sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted despite her earlier strength. "Pierce is my father's business partner, or was. They had a falling out a few months ago over the silver mine." She looked up at Wyatt. "Pierce wants control of all the water and mineral rights in the territory. My father stands in his way. And with you gone, the Harper holdings would be vulnerable," she finished. "Father has no other heirs. If I were to disappear or die without issue, distant cousins back east would inherit people Pierce could easily manipulate or buy off." Wyatt nodded, the pieces falling into place. It was a clever strategy. Eliminate Abigail and Harper's empire would crumble from within. No need for direct confrontation when greed and legal maneuvering could accomplish the same goal. "There's more," Abigail added hesitantly. "Reed, he called me by name. Mrs. Reed." Wyatt froze in the midst of packing. "Mrs. Reed." Victor Reed is my husband. The words fell between them like stones, or was. We married 6 months ago, arranged by my father. It was a business arrangement more than a marriage. Her voice hardened. I discovered he was working with Pierce, planning to gain control of my inheritance. When I confronted him, She gestured to her bruised face. This isn't the first time. The revelation struck Wyatt like a physical blow. Not only was Abigail a Harper, but she was Reed's wife, connected to both men who had destroyed his family, however unwillingly. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this all an elaborate trap, but the fear in Abigail's eyes was too genuine, the bruises too real? We leave in 10 minutes, he said firmly. Can you ride? Relief washed over her face. Yes, my father made sure I could ride before I could walk. Good, we'll take Copper, he can carry double for a while. Wyatt resumed packing, his movements brisk. Reed knows where we're headed, but we'll have a head start. With luck, we'll reach Sycamore Springs before they catch up. As they prepared to leave, Wyatt took one last look around the cabin, the only real home he'd known since the war. Something told him he wouldn't be returning, at least not to find it as he left it. Reed wasn't the type to make empty threats. Outside, he helped Abigail mount Copper, noting how she bit back a wince as her injuries protested the movement. Despite everything, there was a steely determination in her that reminded him uncomfortably of her father. Ready? He asked, swinging up behind her. She nodded back straight, despite her pain. Mr. Callahan, why are you helping me? You clearly have no love for the Harper name. Wyatt was silent for a long moment, considering the question. Finally, he clicked his tongue, urging Copper forward before answering. Let's just say I've seen enough innocent people suffer, he said, even ones named Harper. They rode east as the sun climbed higher, the desert stretching endlessly before them. Behind them, dust settled over the small ranch that Wyatt had built with his own hands, a place of solitude now marked for destruction. And somewhere unseen but drawing closer, Victor Reed gathered his men for the hunt. The wheel had been set in motion, and there would be no stopping it now. Miles away in the elegantly appointed study of the largest house in Sycamore Springs, Solomon Pierce examined the documents spread across his mahogany desk. At 70, he retained the sharp mind and imposing presence that had made him one of the most powerful men in the territory. Silver hair immaculately styled, framed a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cold calculation in his pale eyes. A knock at the door interrupted his review. Enter, he called, not looking up. The door opened to admit a young man in an expensive suit, his face a younger version of Pierce's own, though lacking the older man's confident bearing. Father, a telegram arrived from Victor. Pierce held out his hand without comment, taking the paper and scanning its contents. His expression remained unchanged, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign of his displeasure. It seems Mrs. Reed has found an unlikely ally, he said, finally setting the telegram aside. Wyatt Callahan. The younger man frowned. Callahan. The name is familiar. It should be. Pierce rose from his desk, moving to the window that overlooked the town he essentially owned. His father was Patrick Callahan, my former partner, along with Ezra Harper. A thin smile touched his lips. History has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it? 3 partners. 3 betrayals. What would you have me do? Pierce turned, regarding his son with cool assessment. Nothing, James. This requires a more experienced touch. He returned to his desk, penning a brief note. Have this delivered to Victor. Tell him I want both Abigail and Callahan alive. For now. James took the note with a nod, hesitating at the door. What about Harper? If he learns his daughter is alive, Ezra will learn nothing until I wish it, Pierce replied dismissively. The man is a recluse these days, holed up on that ranch of his, with his secrets and regrets. He waved a hand in dismissal. That will be all. Alone again, Pierce removed a key from his vest pocket, unlocking a drawer in his desk. From it, he withdrew a faded map, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. His finger traced a line across the paper, coming to rest on a spot marked with a small X. After all these years, he murmured, so close to everything I've worked for. I won't let you or your daughter stand in my way, Ezra. Not this time. He replaced the map in the drawer, locking it securely. Outside, the sun beat down on Sycamore Springs, the town going about its business, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, a storm 20 years in the making, born of greed, betrayal, and a silver mine that had never yielded its secrets. Until now. The Arizona sun hung mercilessly overhead as Wyatt and Abigail made their way across the desert. They traveled in relative silence, conserving energy and water, stopping only when necessary to rest Copper. Despite her injuries, Abigail proved to be a resilient companion, never complaining, even when Wyatt could tell she was in pain. By late afternoon, they had covered significant ground, but Wyatt knew they wouldn't reach Sycamore Springs before nightfall. They would need to make camp soon, a prospect that concerned him. Out in the open, they would be vulnerable to Reed and his men. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," he said, breaking the long silence. "Belonged to a rancher who died last winter. It's not much, but it'll provide better shelter than the open desert." Abigail nodded, her back straight against his chest despite hours in the saddle. "How much farther to Sycamore Springs after that?" "Another 4 hours ride tomorrow. We should reach town by midday." And they continued on, the landscape gradually changing from flat desert to rolling hills, dotted with juniper and sage. The line shack appeared as the sun began its descent, a small weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Wyatt dismounted first, helping Abigail down from the saddle. Her legs buckled slightly as they took her weight, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow. She smiled gratefully, though the expression couldn't hide the exhaustion etched across her features. "Rest," he said, nodding toward the shack. "I'll see to copper and gather some firewood." The interior of the shack was dusty but sound, with a small stone fireplace and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. By the time Wyatt returned with an armload of wood, Abigail had cleared away the worst of the dust and was sitting on the cot, her posture betraying her fatigue. Wyatt built a small fire, careful to keep it contained so the smoke wouldn't attract unwanted attention. As flames licked at the dry wood, warmth gradually filled the small space, pushing back against the desert night's approaching chill. They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Wyatt's provisions, washed down with water that tasted of the canteen's metal. As they ate, Abigail studied Wyatt across the fire, her expression thoughtful. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect?" "From the way Victor spoke of you, I expected someone more broken." She held his gaze steadily. "He mentioned you'd been hanged once." Wyatt's hand moved unconsciously to his collar, adjusting it higher, though the scar remained hidden. "Not successfully, obviously." "What happened?" For a long moment, Wyatt considered deflecting the question. He rarely spoke of that day, carrying it like a stone in his chest that had no business being shared. But something in Abigail's direct gaze, free of judgment or pity, loosened his tongue. "After the war, I drifted," he began, eyes fixed on the dancing flames, and took work where I could find it, mostly as a ranch hand. Ended up in a small town in New Mexico territory, working for a man named Garrett. He had a pretty daughter who took a shine to me." Abigail listened intently, her face illuminated by the firelight. "One night, the girl's fiancé, a man she'd been promised to but didn't want, found us talking behind the barn. Nothing untoward, but he didn't see it that way." Wyatt's voice grew distant. "He was the mayor's son. Next morning, I was arrested for attempted assault. By nightfall, they had me standing on a gallows with a rope around my neck." "But you survived," Abigail prompted softly when he fell silent. "The rope was old, snapped when the trapdoor opened." Wyatt's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "I fell through, hit the ground hard, but alive. In the confusion, I managed to get away. Been carrying this souvenir ever since." He tugged his collar down slightly, revealing the edge of the scar that encircled his neck. Abigail's eyes widened, but she showed no revulsion. Instead, there was a kind of understanding in her gaze. "Every scar tells a story," she said absently, touching her own cheek where a fading bruise marked the skin. "They remind us of what we've survived." The simple truth of her words resonated in the quiet shack. Wyatt found himself wondering what other scars she carried, not just the visible ones from her recent ordeal, but the deeper marks left by a missing mother, a controlling father, a husband who betrayed her. "What about you?" he asked. "How does Ezra Harper's daughter end up married to a man like Victor Reed?" Abigail's expression clouded. "My father arranged it. Said it was time I was settled, and Victor seemed respectable enough, a war veteran with business connections." Her laugh held no humor. "I had little say in the matter. Father has always managed my life. And you went along with it. What choice did I have?" There was a flash of defiance in her eyes. "I was raised to be obedient, to trust my father's judgment. By the time I realized Victor's true nature, it was too late." She glanced down at her hands, at the gold band she still wore. "I was planning to leave to go east, to my mother's family, when I discovered Victor's connection to Pierce. That's when they took me." Wyatt considered her words, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the image he'd held of Ezra Harper and anything connected to him. In his mind, the Harper name had always been synonymous with betrayal and loss. Yet Abigail seemed as much a victim of circumstance as he had been. "You should rest," he said, finally uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. "We'll leave at first light." Abigail nodded, settling onto the narrow cot while Wyatt positioned himself near the door, rifle across his knees. Outside, the desert night had fully descended, stars sharp and brilliant against the black canvas of sky. In the distance, a coyote called its lonely cry, echoing across the empty landscape. Sleep came fitfully to Wyatt, his senses attuned to every sound, every shift in the air. Sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, he dozed off only to be jolted awake by Abigail's voice sharp with fear. "No, please don't!" He was at her side in an instant, rifle ready, only to find her still asleep, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Her face was contorted with terror, the hands raised as if to ward off a blow. "Abigail," he called softly, careful not to touch her. "Abigail, wake up. You're safe." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, until they found his face in the dim light of the dying fire. Recognition dawned, followed by visible relief. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pushing herself upright, hair tumbling around her shoulders. "I was back there with them." "No need for apologies," Wyatt said, moving back to give her space. "War taught me about nightmares." Abigail drew a shaky breath, composing herself. Does it ever go away? The fear. Wyatt considered lying, offering the comfort of false hope. Instead, he gave her the truth. "No, but you learn to live alongside it. Make room for it without letting it consume you." She nodded, accepting his words with the same quiet resilience she'd shown throughout their journey. "Thank you. For the truth and for everything else." "Try to sleep," he said, returning to his post by the door. "It's still a few hours till dawn." Abigail settled back onto the cot, but instead of closing her eyes, she studied him in the faint light. "Your brother," she said softly. "What was his name?" The question caught Wyatt off guard. "Daniel," he answered after a moment. "His name was Daniel. You must have loved him very much." "He was the best of us," Wyatt said simply, surprised by how easily the words came. "Always looking out for me even when I didn't deserve it. He'd have made something of himself given the chance." "Like you have." There was no judgment in her tone, only genuine curiosity. Wyatt glanced around the sparse shack, thinking of his small ranch that might already be ashes by now, of the years spent drifting from place to place, carrying his ghosts and grudges. "I'm alive," he said finally. "Some days that's enough." Abigail didn't press further, and eventually her breathing deepened into sleep. Wyatt remained awake, watching over her as the night slowly gave way to the first gray light of dawn. In a few hours, they would reach Sycamore Springs, and he would hand Abigail over to Sheriff Maxwell Hawkins, a good man who would see her safely back to her father. And then Wyatt hadn't thought that far ahead. The reappearance of Victor Reed had reopened wounds he'd thought long scarred over. Perhaps it was time to finally settle that debt, to give Daniel the justice he deserved. One thing was certain: the path that had begun with finding Abigail Harper in the desert would not end in Sycamore Springs. The wheel was still turning, carrying them all toward a reckoning long overdue. They broke camp at first light, leaving no trace of their presence behind. Copper seemed refreshed after the night's rest, carrying his double burden with steady determination as they continued east. The terrain grew more varied as they approached Sycamore Springs, rolling hills giving way to scattered groves of trees fed by underground springs that made this area more hospitable than the desert they'd left behind. Wyatt remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. So far, they'd been fortunate, but he harbored no illusions that their luck would hold indefinitely. Reed would be coming, likely with men hired for the purpose. The only question was whether they could reach the relative safety of town before being overtaken. "Tell me about Sheriff Hawkins," Abigail said as they rode, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "You trust him?" "Maxwell Hawkins is one of the few honest lawmen left in this territory," Wyatt replied. "Served with him during the war. He's a good man, stubborn about the law, but fair. And he'll help us against Reed and Pierce. If there's evidence of wrongdoing, yes. Max isn't the type to be bought or intimidated." Wyatt paused. "But Pierce is powerful in Sycamore Springs. It won't be as simple as walking in and making accusations." Abigail nodded, understanding the implication. "We'll need proof of Pierce's involvement in my kidnapping." "That would be a start." They fell silent again, each lost in thought as the sun climbed higher. Around midday, they crested a hill to see Sycamore Springs spread before them in the valley below, a substantial town by territory standards, with several streets of wooden buildings, a church spire rising above the rest, and the silver ribbon of a creek winding along its eastern edge. "Almost there," Wyatt said, allowing himself a moment of relief. They had made it without incident, a fact that both reassured and unsettled him. Reed was not known for giving up so easily. As they approached the outskirts of town, Abigail suddenly stiffened in the saddle. "Wait," she said urgently. "We can't just ride in together. If Victor has men watching the town—" Wyatt reined Copper to a halt, considering her words. She was right, they would make a conspicuous pair, and word would quickly reach Reed of their arrival. "There's a back way into town," he decided, "an old trail that follows the creek. Less visible." They altered course, skirting the main road to approach Sycamore Springs from the east. The trail was overgrown in places, but passable, offering cover from casual observation. As they neared the first scattered buildings, Wyatt guided Copper into a narrow alley between a livery stable and a mercantile. "Sheriff's office is 2 blocks down," he said, dismounting and helping Abigail down. "Stay close and keep your head down." They moved through town with purposeful anonymity, avoiding the busier streets. Despite their caution, Wyatt felt exposed, acutely aware of Abigail beside him, in her dust-covered but still fine dress, a stark contrast to his own weathered appearance. They drew curious glances from the few people they passed, but no one moved to stop them. The sheriff's office was a solid building of red brick, one of the few structures in town not made of wood. Wyatt led Abigail up the steps, relief washing over him as they stepped through the door into the relative safety within. Sheriff Maxwell Hawkins looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his weathered face as he recognized his visitor. "Wyatt Callahan," he said, rising to his feet. "Now there's a ghost from the past." Wyatt nodded in greeting. "Max, been a while." "5 years at least." The sheriff's sharp eyes moved to Abigail, taking in her bruised face and torn clothing. His expression shifted to one of professional concern. "Ma'am, are you in some kind of trouble?" "This is Abigail Harper," Wyatt said, noting how the sheriff's eyebrows rose at the name. "She needs your help." "We both do." Maxwell gestured to the chairs facing his desk. "Best start at the beginning, then." For the next half hour, they took turns explaining the situation: Abigail's kidnapping, Wyatt's rescue, Reed's appearance at the ranch, and their journey to Sycamore Springs. Maxwell listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Solomon Pierce," he said when they finished, leaning back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation against a powerful man." "It's the truth," Abigail insisted. "Victor admitted working for him. They wanted me to sign over my inheritance rights." "Or make you disappear entirely," Wyatt added. Either way, with Abigail gone, Harper's holdings would be vulnerable. Maxwell stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the town. "Pierce practically owns Sycamore Springs. Half the business is most of the land. He's got the mayor in his pocket and judges who owe him favors." He turned back to face them. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, but we'll need more than words to move against a man like that." "What about Reed?" Wyatt asked. "He's a kidnapper at minimum. Him I can arrest if we find him." Maxwell's eyes narrowed. "You're sure he recognized you?" "Positive, and he knows we were headed this way." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to get Mrs. Reed somewhere safe while we sort this out." He glanced at Abigail. "No offense, ma'am, but you look like you could use a doctor's attention and some proper rest." "I'm stronger than I look, Sheriff," Abigail replied with quiet dignity. "But I would appreciate both." "Doc Perkins has rooms above his practice where you can stay," Maxwell said. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and secure. I'll have my deputy escort you there." He moved to the door, calling out to a young man in the outer office. As arrangements were made for Abigail's care, Wyatt found himself reluctant to let her out of his sight. The protective instinct surprised him. She was, after all, still a Harper, and now officially under the sheriff's protection. His duty to her was fulfilled. Yet when the moment came for her to leave with the deputy, Wyatt found himself stepping forward. "I'll check on you later," he said, the words coming unbidden. Abigail's eyes met his, something unspoken passing between them. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan, for everything." After she left, Maxwell closed the office door and turned to Wyatt with a grave expression. "Now, old friend, tell me what you didn't say in front of the lady. What's your stake in this? Because the Wyatt Callahan I knew wouldn't cross the street to help a Harper, let alone risk his life for one." Wyatt sank into a chair, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion from days of vigilance and hard travel. "It's complicated, Max. Isn't it always?" The sheriff produced a bottle of whiskey from a desk drawer, pouring 2 fingers into each of 2 glasses. He pushed one toward Wyatt. "Start with Victor Reed. You said he was in your unit during the war." Wyatt accepted the drink gratefully, taking a slow sip before answering. "He was Daniel Sargent, fed information to the Confederates about our positions, our strength. The attack that killed Daniel wasn't random, it was an ambush, and Reed made it possible." "You never mentioned this before." "Didn't have proof, just suspicion. By the time I pieced it together, Reed had disappeared." Wyatt's fingers tightened around the glass. "Now he shows up working for Pierce, the same man who destroyed my father." Maxwell's brow furrowed. "Pierce, what's he got to do with your father?" "He was my father's partner, along with Ezra Harper back in the early days. They discovered a silver mine together." Wyatt's voice hardened. "Pierce wanted it all. He planted evidence that my father was embezzling from the partnership. Harper believed him, turned his back on Dad. The scandal ruined him. He put a gun in his mouth a week later." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. "And now Pierce is after Harper's holdings through his daughter. History repeating itself." "Seems that way." Maxwell drained his glass, setting it down with a decisive thunk. So this isn't just about helping Mrs. Reed. You're after Reed for Daniel and Pierce for your father. Wyatt didn't deny it. Justice is long overdue for both. Justice, not vengeance, Maxwell said sharply. There's a difference, Wyatt. One I uphold, the other I'll stop, even if it's you. I know the difference, Wyatt replied, though the line had blurred in his mind over the years. Maxwell studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Get some rest. You look dead on your feet. We'll talk more later about how to proceed. As Wyatt rose to leave, the sheriff added, Wyatt, whatever your history with the Harpers, that woman needs help. Don't let old grudges cloud your judgment. Wyatt paused at the door, considering his friend's words. Some grudges run too deep to forget, Max. But I'll see this through one way or another. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sycamore Springs. Wyatt led Copper to the livery stable, arranging for the horse's care before finding a modest room at a nearby boarding house. As he collapsed onto the narrow bed, exhaustion finally claiming him, his last conscious thought was of Abigail's face in the firelight, speaking of scars and survival, with a wisdom born of shared suffering. Old grudges indeed ran deep, but perhaps, just perhaps, there were some wrongs that mattered more than others and some debts that deserved to be paid first. The morning broke clear and crisp over Sycamore Springs sunlight, painting the modest buildings in hues of gold and amber. After a night of dreamless sleep, the first truly restful slumber he'd had in days, Wyatt found himself walking the streets of town with renewed purpose. His first stop was the mercantile, where he purchased necessities to replace what he'd left behind at his ranch. The shopkeeper, an older man with kind eyes and a shock of white hair, studied him with open curiosity. Don't get many strangers these days, the man commented as he wrapped Wyatt's purchases. Name's Edgar Sullivan. Been running this place since before the war. Wyatt Callahan, he replied, offering his hand. Sullivan's eyes widened slightly. Callahan, any relation to Patrick Callahan? The question caught Wyatt off guard. It had been years since anyone had recognized his father's name. He was my father. Well, I'll be. Sullivan's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. Your father and I were friends back in the day, before he partnered with Harper and Pierce. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Terrible business what happened to him. Never believed those accusations for a minute. A lump formed in Wyatt's throat. You knew him well. Well enough to know he wasn't a thief. Sullivan studied Wyatt's face. You've got his look about you. Same eyes. He finished wrapping the purchases, then hesitated. If you don't mind my asking, what brings Patrick Callahan's son back to these parts after all this time? Wyatt considered his response carefully. News traveled fast in small towns, and he wasn't ready to broadcast his business. But something about Sullivan's genuine manner invited confidence. Just passing through, he said finally. Had some unfinished business to attend to. Sullivan nodded clearly, sensing there was more to the story but respecting Wyatt's reticence. Well, if there's anything you need while you're here, you come see old Edgar. Any son of Patrick's is welcome in my store. As Wyatt gathered his purchases, Sullivan added almost as an afterthought, you know, Ezra Harper still runs that big spread west of here. Man's become a recluse these past years. Rarely comes to town anymore, sends his foreman instead. He shook his head. Time changes us all, I suppose. What about Solomon Pierce? Wyatt asked, unable to resist gathering information. Sullivan's expression darkened. Pierce owns half this town now. Started buying up businesses and land about 15 years back. Man's got ambition. I'll give him that. He lowered his voice again. Between you and me, there's not much happens in Sycamore Springs that Pierce doesn't have a hand in one way or another. Sounds like he's done well for himself. Too well, some might say. Sullivan glanced toward the window as if checking who might be passing by. You watch yourself around Pierce and his people. They don't take kindly to, complications. Wyatt thanked the shopkeeper for the warning and headed back onto the street, his mind turning over the encounter. It was oddly comforting to find someone who had known his father, who hadn't believed the lies that destroyed him. It made the burden of the past slightly lighter to carry. His next stop was the doctor's office, a tidy two-story building on a side street. Dr. Perkins, a thin man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, met him at the door. Mrs. Reed is resting, the doctor informed him. Her injuries are not severe, but she needs time to recover her strength. Sheriff Hawkins left a deputy to keep watch. I'd like to see her if that's possible, Wyatt said. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, she's been asking for you. Upstairs, Wyatt found Abigail sitting by a window in a small but comfortable room. She wore a simple dress borrowed from the doctor's wife, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish smudges, and though still pale, she looked more composed than he had yet seen her. She turned at his entrance, a smile warming her features. "Mr. Callahan, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." "Not likely," he replied, removing his hat as he approached. "How are you feeling?" "Better. De Perkins has been very kind." She gestured to the chair opposite hers. "Please sit. Tell me what Sheriff Hawkins has planned." Wyatt settled into the offered chair. "Max is being cautious. Pierce has influence here, and we need more than just our word to move against him." Abigail's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. There might be a way to prove Pierce's involvement." She leaned forward slightly. "Victor keeps records of everything. It's a habit from his army days. If we could find his journal, it might contain evidence of Pierce's orders regarding my kidnapping." "Any idea where he would keep such a journal?" "He had a room at the Grand Hotel whenever we visited Sycamore Springs." A shadow crossed her face. "Pierce often summoned him there, though I didn't know why at the time." Wyatt considered this information. The Grand Hotel was the finest establishment in town and owned by Pierce. If Sullivan's assessment of the man's holdings was accurate, searching Victor's room would be risky but potentially valuable. "I'll speak with Max about it," he promised. "In the meantime, you should continue resting." Abigail studied him with those perceptive blue eyes. "And what will you do, Mr. Callahan, now that you've delivered me to safety?" It was a fair question, one Wyatt had been asking himself. The simplest course would be to leave now, to ride away from the tangled web of Harpers and Pierces that had destroyed his family once before. But the reappearance of Victor Reed had changed everything. Some debts demanded payment. "I have unfinished business with Reed," he said finally, "and with Pierce." "Because of your father and brother," she said softly, not a question, but a statement. Wyatt looked at her sharply. "How do you know about that?" "Sheriff Hawkins mentioned it when he visited this morning. He's worried about you." Her gaze didn't waver. "He said vengeance is a dangerous road." "It's not vengeance, it's justice." "Is there a difference?" The question held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. Before Wyatt could respond, a commotion from downstairs interrupted them. Raised voices, heavy footsteps on the stairs. The door burst open to reveal Deputy Carson Young and flustered. "Mr. Callahan's sheriff needs you right away," he blurted. "Riders coming into town, Victor Reed and at least 6 men with him." Wyatt was on his feet instantly. "Stay here," he instructed Abigail. "Lock the door behind me." Her face had paled, but she nodded firmly. "Be careful." Outside, Wyatt found Maxwell Hawkins in the middle of the street, badge gleaming on his chest, watching as a group of riders approached from the west. Victor Reed led them, his scarred face easy to identify even at a distance. The men with him had the hard look of hired guns, not cowboys or ranch hands. "They're making no attempt to hide," Maxwell observed as Wyatt joined him. "Bold move riding in like this." "Reed's never lacked for confidence," Wyatt replied grimly. "What's the plan?" "I'm the law here. I'll speak to them first, see what they want." Maxwell's hand rested near his holstered revolver. "But be ready. Reed doesn't strike me as the type to respect a badge if it stands in his way." The riders slowed as they entered the town proper, drawing to a halt 20 yards from where Maxwell and Wyatt stood. Reed's gaze fixed on Wyatt, a smirk playing across his scarred features. "Well, well," he called, "if it isn't the hero himself. Thought you might have moved on by now, Callahan." "What do you want, Reed?" Maxwell demanded, stepping forward to assert his authority. Reed turned his attention to the sheriff, his expression shifting to one of exaggerated politeness. "Sheriff Hawkins, I presume I'm here on legitimate business. My wife has gone missing, and I have reason to believe she's in your town." "Your wife," Maxwell's tone remained professional, betraying nothing. "Abigail Reed née Harper." Victor's gaze flicked to Wyatt. "This man took her from our home against her will. I've come to retrieve her and see justice done." Wyatt's hand tightened on his gun, but Maxwell shot him a warning glance. "Serious accusations, Mr. Reed," the sheriff replied evenly. "Do you have any proof to support them?" Reed reached into his coat, producing a folded document, which he handed down to Maxwell. "Marriage certificate and a sworn statement from my ranch foreman, who witnessed Callahan taking my wife at gunpoint." Maxwell examined the papers, his expression unreadable. "I see. And these men," he gestured to Reed's companions, "associates concerned for Mrs. Reed's safety." Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, if you'll direct us to my wife's location, we can resolve this matter quickly." Maxwell handed the papers back. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Mr. Reed. I've received conflicting accounts of the situation. Until I determine the truth, Mrs. Reed remains under my protection." Reed's facade of politeness slipped. "You're interfering in a private matter, Sheriff. When it involves potential kidnapping and assault, it becomes my business." Maxwell stood his ground. You and your men are welcome to take rooms at the hotel while this is sorted out, but I'll need those guns. A tense silence followed the men behind Reed shifting restlessly in their saddles. For a moment, Wyatt thought violence would erupt right there in the street. Then Reed laughed a sound devoid of humor. Of course, Sheriff. We're law-abiding citizens. He made a show of unbuckling his gun belt, motioning for his men to do the same. We'll cooperate fully, but I expect this matter resolved promptly. My wife has been unwell recently, prone to delusions and false accusations. The implication hung in the air, a calculated attempt to discredit anything Abigail might say against him. Maxwell accepted the surrendered weapons with a nod, instructing Deputy Carson to store them in the jail. I'll speak with Mrs. Reed again, he informed Reed. In the meantime, I suggest you and your men keep to yourselves. This town is peaceful, and I aim to keep it that way. Reed dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. The Grand Hotel boys. Mr. Pierce always keeps rooms available for friends. He locked eyes with Wyatt. This isn't over, Callahan. Not by a long shot. As Reed and his men moved off toward the hotel, Maxwell turned to Wyatt. Well, that complicates things. He's playing this by the book, making you out to be the kidnapper. You don't believe him. I know you, Wyatt, and I saw Mrs. Reed's injuries. Maxwell shook his head. But Reed's brought paperwork and witnesses. We need solid evidence if we're going to counter his claims. Wyatt nodded, thinking of Abigail's suggestion about Victor's journal. I might know where to find some. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. Care to share? Not yet. Give me until tonight. Wyatt glanced toward the Grand Hotel, where Reed and his men were disappearing through the ornate entrance. In the meantime, double the guard on Abigail. Reed didn't come all this way to leave empty-handed. Already planned to, Maxwell assured him. But Wyatt, whatever you're thinking, be careful. Reed's connected to Pierce, and crossing either of them is dangerous enough. Crossing both could be fatal. Wyatt clapped his old friend on the shoulder. I died once already, Max. Didn't take. But as he walked away, Wyatt knew the sheriff's warning was well-founded. Reed's arrival with legal documents and witnesses suggested a level of preparation that went beyond a simple pursuit. He and Pierce were setting the stage for something that would require Abigail back in their control by legal means, if possible by force if necessary. The stakes had just been raised, and time, Wyatt suspected, was running short. Night fell over Sycamore Springs, bringing with it a hushed anticipation that seemed to permeate the very air. From his vantage point in an alley across from the Grand Hotel, Wyatt watched as lamps were lit in windows, casting golden squares against the growing darkness. He had spent the afternoon gathering information, discreet questions asked in the right places, observations made from shadowed corners. The Grand Hotel occupied a prime location on the town's main street, its 3 stories of painted wood and decorative trim standing in stark contrast to the simpler buildings surrounding it. Like everything Solomon Pierce owned, it projected an image of wealth and respectability that masked its true nature. According to Edgar Sullivan, who had proven to be a valuable source of local knowledge, the hotel's 3rd floor was reserved exclusively for Pierce and his associates. Wyatt had confirmed that Reed and his men occupied rooms on that floor. He had also learned through careful observation that only Reed remained in the hotel now. The others had dispersed throughout town, presumably to keep watch on potential exits and gather information. 2 had been spotted near the doctor's office, reinforcing Wyatt's concern for Abigail's safety. A movement at the hotel's entrance drew his attention. Victor Reed emerged, pausing to light a cigar before heading down the street toward the town's most popular saloon. Wyatt waited until Reed disappeared inside before making his move. The hotel's back entrance was unguarded, an oversight Wyatt attributed to Reed's confidence rather than carelessness. Using the key he had procured earlier, slipped to him by a sympathetic hotel maid who remembered his father, Wyatt entered quietly, making his way up the back stairs reserved for staff. The 3rd-floor hallway was deserted, thick carpet muffling his footsteps as he moved toward room 307, Reed's usual accommodation, according to the maid. The lock yielded to another key from his borrowed set, and Wyatt slipped inside, closing the door silently behind him. The room was luxurious by frontier standards, a large bed, solid furniture, even a private bathroom separated by a half-wall. Reed's belongings were scattered about with the carelessness of a man accustomed to others cleaning up after him. Wyatt worked methodically, searching through saddlebags, clothing, and personal items, careful to leave everything as he found it. In a locked drawer of the writing desk, he discovered what he sought, a leather-bound journal, well used, and filled with Reed's cramped handwriting. Lighting a small lamp, Wyatt began to read, skimming pages of daily entries until he found references to Abigail and Pierce. The entries confirmed everything Abigail had claimed. Reed documented meetings with Pierce, references to the Harper job, and securing the inheritance. Most damning was an entry from 3 weeks earlier. Pierce insists the Harper woman must sign the documents or disappear permanently. Prefers the former for appearance's sake but will accept the latter if necessary. Payment to be doubled if completed within the month. Wyatt continued reading, finding detailed accounts of the kidnapping plan, the ransom demand designed to be rejected, and the intended fate of Abigail had she not escaped a remote cabin in Mexico, where she would be forced to sign over her rights before meeting with an unfortunate accident. There was more references to Daniel's death that confirmed Reed's deliberate betrayal of their unit mentions of Solomon Pierce's involvement in the scheme that had destroyed Patrick Callahan, and most surprisingly notes about Josephine Callahan. Wyatt froze rereading the passage to ensure he hadn't misunderstood. Pierce mentioned the Callahan woman again today. Says her disappearance 10 years ago was necessary to protect certain interests. Warned me to ensure Abigail doesn't start asking questions about her mother's fate. Too many connections that could unravel everything. Josephine Callahan, Wyatt's mother, who had left shortly after his father's suicide, abandoning her sons to their grief. He had always assumed she had gone east to family, unable to face the scandal and shame. But this suggested something far more sinister. And the reference to Abigail's mother, could it be possible a sound in the hallway interrupted his thoughts? Footsteps approaching the room. Quickly, Wyatt tore out the most incriminating pages from the journal, tucking them into his shirt, before replacing the book exactly as he had found it. He had just relocked the drawer when the door handle turned. There was no time to reach the main door. Instead, Wyatt slipped into the bathroom, pressing himself against the wall beside the entrance. The door opened and someone entered. Not Reed, judging by the lighter footsteps, but someone familiar with the room who moved directly to the desk. Risking a glance around the corner, Wyatt saw a young man in an expensive suit, his back to the bathroom, as he unlocked the drawer Wyatt had just secured. The man removed Reed's journal, leafing through it with obvious purpose. When he turned slightly to better catch the light, his profile was visible, a younger version of Solomon Pierce. James Pierce, the son. Wyatt had heard mention of him from Sullivan, but had not yet encountered him in town. What was he doing searching Reed's room? And how did he have a key to the locked drawer? James found whatever he was looking for, tearing out several pages from the journal before replacing it. With methodical care, he relocked the drawer and moved toward the door, never noticing the silent observer in the bathroom. When the door closed behind James, Wyatt waited a full minute before emerging. The coincidence was too precise to be accident. James had come specifically to remove evidence from Reed's journal, evidence that might implicate his father. The question was whether he had taken the same pages Wyatt had already secured or different ones that might reveal even more. Either way, time was running short. If James was sanitizing Reed's records, it suggested Pierce was preparing to make his move. Wyatt needed to get the evidence to Maxwell and ensure Abigail's continued safety. Checking that the hallway was clear, he slipped out of Reed's room and made his way back down the service stairs. Outside, the night had deepened, the town quieter now, as most respectable citizens retired to their homes. Only the saloons and gambling halls remained fully active, their light and noise creating perfect cover for his movement through the shadows. Wyatt had nearly reached the doctor's office when instinct made him pause, drawing back into a darkened doorway. Moments later, two of Reed's men passed by, engaged in low conversation. "Midnight," Pierce says. "The old man's arrived in town, staying at the ranch house just outside the eastern boundary." Reed know about this. Course he does. He's meeting with him now. Once the Harper woman's secured, we deliver her to the ranch house and collect our pay. What about Callahan? A low chuckle. Reed's got special plans for him. Personal-like. The men moved on, their voices fading into the night. Wyatt remained motionless, processing this new information. The old man could only be Ezra Harper, arrived to retrieve his daughter. But if Reed and Pierce knew this, why hadn't they simply turned Abigail over to her father? Unless... A cold certainty settled over Wyatt. They never intended to return Abigail to her father. Whatever plan Pierce had set in motion required both Harpers in his control. And based on the journal entries, it had something to do with Josephine Callahan's disappearance 10 years earlier. Moving with renewed urgency, Wyatt reached the doctor's office to find Deputy Carson dozing in a chair outside Abigail's room. "Wake up," Wyatt hissed, shaking the young man's shoulder. "Where's the doctor?" Carson blinked awake, fumbling for his gun. "Mr. Callahan, Doc's gone home for the night. Sheriff said I was to stay here until morning. Is Mrs. Reed still inside?" "Yes, sir, sleeping last I checked." Wyatt nodded toward the stairs. "Go find Sheriff Hawkins. Tell him Reed's men are planning something for midnight. I'll stay with Mrs. Reed." The deputy hesitated. "Sheriff said I wasn't to leave my post for any reason." "This is the reason, Carson. Go, now." Something in Wyatt's tone convinced the young man. He nodded, checking his revolver before hurrying down the stairs. Once alone, Wyatt knocked softly on Abigail's door. "Mrs. Reed, it's Wyatt Callahan." After a moment, the door opened to reveal Abigail fully dressed, a small revolver in her hand. She lowered it upon recognizing him. Mr. Callahan, I was beginning to worry. We need to move, he said, entering and closing the door behind him. Reed's men are planning something for midnight, and your father has arrived in town. Surprise flickered across her face. My father be here, at a ranch house east of town, according to Reed's men. Wyatt produced the torn pages from the journal. I found these in Reed's room. They confirm everything you've told us about Pierce's involvement in your kidnapping. But there's more. He hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject of Josephine Callahan. Abigail took the pages, scanning them quickly. Her face paled as she read. This mentions my mother, she said, looking up at Wyatt. Pierce was involved in her disappearance. It appears so. Wyatt took a deep breath. Abigail, there's a possibility. The journal mentions my mother, Josephine Callahan, who left after my father's death. It suggests Pierce was involved in her disappearance as well. Abigail's eyes widened as she grasped the implication. You think, my mother and yours? I don't know, Wyatt admitted, but it's a connection we can't ignore. Pierce went to great lengths to separate both women from their families. The question is, well, if I'm... Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, the pages trembling in her hand. All these years, I believed she might still be alive somewhere. Father insisted she was dead, but he never allowed me to speak of her. She looked up at Wyatt, a new determination in her eyes. We need to confront my father. He must know more than he's told me. First, we need to get you somewhere safe. If Reed's men are planning to take you at midnight, this location is compromised. Wyatt moved to the window, checking the street below. We'll go to the sheriff's office. Maxwell will know what to do next. Abigail gathered her few belongings, quickly securing the precious journal pages inside her bodice. As they prepared to leave, a soft sound from the hallway made them both freeze, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard. Wyatt drew his revolver, motioning for Abigail to stand behind him as he approached the door. Before he could reach it, the door burst open and 3 men rushed in, not Reed's men, but strangers Wyatt had never seen before. They moved with military precision, 2 targeting Wyatt, while the 3rd went directly for Abigail. Wyatt fired, hitting one attacker in the shoulder, but the 2nd man was on him before he could aim again. They crashed into the wall, struggling for control of the weapon. Across the room, Abigail fought her own battle, her small revolver discharged once before being knocked from her hand. Get her out, one man shouted. We'll handle Callahan. Through the chaos, Wyatt saw the 3rd man dragging Abigail toward the door, her struggles ineffective against his superior strength. With desperate force, Wyatt slammed his head forward, connecting with his opponent's nose. As the man reeled back, Wyatt broke free, only to be tackled by the first attacker, wounded, but still dangerous. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Wyatt's gun skittering across the floor. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, but 2 against 1 were impossible odds. A blow to his temple sent stars exploding across his vision, followed by another to his ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Through the haze of pain, he heard Abigail's voice still fighting, calling his name. Then a final blow landed, and darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by throbbing pain and the copper taste of blood. Wyatt blinked, trying to focus on his surroundings. He lay on the floor of Abigail's room now, in disarray from the struggle. How long had he been unconscious? Minutes, hours. A sound from the doorway drew his attention. Maxwell Hawkins stood there, Deputy Carson behind him. Both men surveying the scene with grim expressions. Wyatt, Maxwell moved to his side, helping him to a sitting position. What happened? Where's Mrs. Reed? Taken, Wyatt managed, wincing as pain lanced through his ribs. 3 men, not Reed's. Professional. Maxwell exchanged a look with Carson. We found Reed at the saloon, exactly where he's been all evening, with witnesses to verify it. A diversion, Wyatt said, struggling to his feet with Maxwell's assistance. Reed's visible while someone else does the dirty work. He touched his temple, fingers coming away bloody. What time is it? Just past 11, Carson supplied. We still have time, Wyatt said, moving unsteadily toward the door. They mentioned taking her to a ranch house east of town where her father is staying. Maxwell caught his arm. Wyatt, you're in no condition to... I'm going, Max. Wyatt's tone brooked no argument. I found evidence in Reed's journal linking Pierce to both kidnapping Abigail and the disappearance of my mother 10 years ago. Whatever they're planning, it involves both Harpers. The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this by the book. I'll gather a few men I trust, and we'll ride out together. No time, Wyatt insisted. You gather your men, but I'm leaving now. Every minute matters. Before Maxwell could protest further, the thunder of hooves on the street below drew them to the window. A group of riders was heading east out of town, Victor Reed, among them, easily identifiable even in the darkness. Looks like Reed's done waiting, Maxwell observed grimly. Or received new orders, Wyatt countered, checking his revolver, miraculously still loaded despite the struggle. I need to borrow a horse. Maxwell knew better than to argue further. Take mine. She's faster than anything in the livery. Carson gathered deputies Miller and Thompson. Tell them to meet me at the East Road in 10 minutes. He turned back to Wyatt. Don't do anything foolish until we arrive. That's an order, soldier. Wyatt offered a grim smile. Never was much good at following orders, Max. Minutes later, he was riding hard along the Eastern Road, Maxwell's sturdy bay mare eating up the distance with powerful strides. The night air was cool against his face, clearing the last cobwebs from his mind as he focused on the task ahead. The road followed the creek, its silver ribbon visible in the moonlight, leading toward a cluster of distant lights that marked the ranch house. As he rode, Wyatt's mind raced through possibilities. Why would Pierce want both Harpers in one location? The silver mine was valuable, certainly, but enough to justify kidnapping and potential murder. And how did Josephine Callahan fit into the puzzle? There were missing pieces, connections he couldn't yet see. The ranch house appeared ahead, a substantial two-story structure set back from the road, light spilling from its windows into the surrounding darkness. Several horses were tethered outside, including those belonging to Reed and his men. Wyatt slowed, approaching with caution. No guards were visible outside, either carelessness or confidence that no one would follow so quickly. Dismounting at a distance, Wyatt secured Maxwell's horse to a tree and approached on foot, using the shadows for cover. As he neared the house, voices became audible through an open window on the ground floor, raised in argument, one deep and commanding, the other defensive and familiar. Told you she was becoming a problem, Ezra, asking too many questions about Josephine. That gave you no right to take matters into your own hands, Solomon. She is my daughter, an heir to everything we've built, too much at stake to risk her discovering the truth. Wyatt crept closer, positioning himself beneath the window where he could hear more clearly. Inside, he could make out three figures, Solomon Pierce standing with his back to the window, an older man who could only be Ezra Harper, gray-haired but still imposing, and Victor Reed standing guard near a door that presumably led to wherever they were keeping Abigail. The truth, Harper repeated, his voice bitter. Which truth would that be, Solomon? That you orchestrated Patrick Callahan's destruction based on forged evidence? That you manipulated me into turning against my oldest friend? Or perhaps the truth about what really happened to Josephine? Pierce moved closer to Harper, his posture menacing despite his refined appearance. Careful, Ezra. You're only alive because I still need your signature on certain documents. Don't test my patience. You won't get away with this, Harper said firmly. Abigail won't sign anything under duress, and without both our signatures, the mine remains inaccessible. Pierce laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. You overestimate your position, old friend. Once you're both gone, declared lost in a tragic accident, your holdings pass to those distant relatives back east, people who will be only too happy to sell to me for the right price. You'd murder us both after everything we've built together. I prefer to think of it as consolidating interests. Pierce moved to a sideboard, pouring himself a drink, with the casual air of a man discussing business rather than murder. It's nothing personal, Ezra, simply the logical conclusion to our long association. From his position, Wyatt could see Harper's face clearly, now lined with age and worry, but bearing the unmistakable strength of character that had made him a force in the territory. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at Wyatt's memory. And what about the Callahan boy? Harper asked, his voice lower now. Victor says he's involved. Pierce set down his glass. An unfortunate complication. Reed will handle him. Reed stepped forward in eager anticipation in his posture. Already taken care of, Mr. Pierce. My men should be dealing with Callahan as we speak. Harper's expression hardened. More blood on your hands. Solomon wasn't Patrick enough. His son bears no responsibility for your schemes. He made himself responsible when he interfered with my plans for your daughter, Pierce replied coldly. Besides, it's almost poetic. Don't you think, the last of the Callahans and the last of the Harpers meeting the same end? Something in Pierce's phrasing caught Wyatt's attention. The last of the Harpers. If Abigail was truly the last, then her mother was indeed dead, or at least Pierce believed she was. But how did Josephine Callahan connect to all this? The answer came in Harper's next words, spoken so softly that Wyatt nearly missed them. Josephine deserved better than what you did to her. She was a good woman who only wanted to protect her children, all of them. All of them. The words echoed in Wyatt's mind, pieces suddenly clicking into place with devastating clarity. Josephine Callahan, Abigail's mother. The connections that could unravel everything. Could it be possible? Was Abigail's mother also his? Had Josephine left Patrick Callahan for Ezra Harper, bearing him a daughter, before disappearing 10 years ago? It would explain Pierce's determination to keep Abigail from asking questions about her mother, his insistence on separating her from her father. If Abigail ever discovered her connection to the Callahans, she might start investigating the past, including the false accusations against Patrick Callahan and the silver mine that had started it all. Wyatt's shock at this revelation was interrupted by movement inside the room. Reed was heading toward the door, presumably to check on their prisoner. It was now or never. Maxwell and his deputies might not arrive in time, and Wyatt couldn't risk waiting if Pierce intended to eliminate both Harpers tonight. Drawing his revolver, he prepared to make his move. But before he could act, a new sound reached his ears, hoofbeats approaching from the direction of town. Multiple riders moving fast. Maxwell had made good time. Inside, Pierce and Reed had also heard. Visitors, Pierce said sharply. Unexpected. Reed, see who it is. As Reed moved toward the front of the house, Wyatt took advantage of the distraction. With a swift movement, he hoisted himself through the open window, landing in a crouch with his gun trained on Pierce. Don't move, he commanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. Where's Abigail? Pierce recovered quickly from his surprise, a cold smile spreading across his features. Wyatt Callahan, I should have known Reed's men would bungle the job. He made no move toward a weapon, his confidence unshaken. Mrs. Reed is quite safe, I assure you. For the moment. Ezra Harper stared at Wyatt with undisguised shock. Callahan, Patrick's boy. His eyes traveled over Wyatt's face, recognition dawning. My God, you look just like him. Where is she? Wyatt repeated, ignoring Harper's reaction. The lady is upstairs, Pierce replied smoothly. But I'm afraid you've interrupted a private business discussion. Perhaps you should leave before what? Wyatt cut him off. Before Reed returns, before you can finish whatever plan you've set in motion. He shifted his aim slightly, ensuring Pierce understood the threat. I know about the journal, Pierce, about your involvement in my father's destruction and my brother's death through Reed and Josephine Callahan's disappearance. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Pierce's face for the first time. You know nothing, boy. I know enough. Wyatt's gaze shifted briefly to Harper, including the fact that Josephine Callahan became Josephine Harper and bore you a daughter before disappearing 10 years ago. Harper's face paled, confirming Wyatt's suspicion without words. Pierce, however, merely laughed. Very good, Callahan. You've pieced it together. He moved casually toward the sideboard again, seemingly unconcerned by the gun trained on him. Yes, your mother left your father for Ezra here. Quite the scandal it would have been had anyone known, but we kept it quiet for business reasons. Don't, Solomon, Harper warned, but Pierce waved him off. He deserves to know the truth, Ezra. About his mother, about the mine, about everything. Pierce poured another drink, his movements deliberate. Your father discovered the silver mine first, Callahan. On land that had technically belonged to neither him nor Ezra, but which could be claimed by whoever filed the proper paperwork. They brought me in as a partner for the capital needed to develop it. And you betrayed him, Wyatt said flatly. I recognized an opportunity, Pierce corrected. Patrick was the idealist among us, always talking about equal shares and doing things properly. Ezra was more pragmatic. When I suggested we might cut Patrick out entirely, Ezra didn't object too strenuously, especially after Josephine had already transferred her affections to him. Harper stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. That's not how it happened, and you know it. You forged those documents, made it look like Patrick was embezzling from our partnership. I believed you because I had no reason not to. By the time I learned the truth, Patrick was dead, and you had leveraged your position to take control of everything. A convenient narrative, Pierce scoffed. But tell me, Ezra, did you search very hard for the truth? Or were you too busy consoling Patrick's widow? The accusation hung in the air, heavy with implication. Harper's expression was a mixture of guilt and fury, suggesting a more complex truth than either man was admitting. Enough, Wyatt interrupted, his patience wearing thin. Where is Abigail? As I said, upstairs, Pierce replied, but you won't be joining her. Reed will be returning any moment, and my men outnumber you significantly. As if on cue, the sound of footsteps approached from the hallway. Wyatt tensed, ready for confrontation, but it was Abigail who appeared in the doorway, her wrists bound but otherwise unharmed. Behind her, Victor Reed pressed a gun to her back, his scarred face twisted in a triumphant smirk. Look what I found trying to escape down the back stairs, Reed announced. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Wyatt. And I see we have another guest. This saves me the trouble of hunting you down, Callahan. Let her go, Reed, Wyatt demanded, dividing his attention between Reed and Pierce. It's over. Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies are on their way. Is that who was approaching? Reed seemed unconcerned. My men will handle them. Small-town lawmen are no match for professional gun hands. Abigail's eyes met Wyatt's across the room, a silent message passing between them. Despite her bound wrists, she stood tall, her composure unbroken. Her gaze shifted to Ezra Harper. a complex emotion crossing her features. Father, she acknowledged, her voice steady. I should have known you'd be involved in this. Abigail, Harper stepped toward her, but Reed's gun halted his movement. I had nothing to do with your kidnapping. Pierce acted without my knowledge. But you know, why don't you? She challenged. You know what he's trying to hide, what you've been hiding from me my entire life. Harper's expression softened. Yes, and I'm sorry more than you can know. I thought I was protecting you. From what? The truth about my mother, about who she was before she married you. The room fell silent, all eyes on Harper as he struggled with a decision that had clearly weighed on him for years. Finally, he straightened, facing his daughter directly. Your mother was Josephine Callahan before she became Josephine Harper, he admitted. She was married to Patrick Callahan, Wyatt's father. She left him for me after a long and complicated history between our families. Abigail's gaze darted to Wyatt, understanding dawning in her eyes. Then Wyatt is your half-brother, Harper confirmed, through your mother. The revelation, though Wyatt had already pieced it together, still landed with the force of a physical blow. Abigail, a Harper by name but a Callahan by blood. His sister. The connection he had felt with her from the beginning suddenly made sense in a way he had never anticipated. Pierce slow clapped, the sound jarring in the tense silence. How touching. A family reunion before the end. He nodded to Reed. Take them both upstairs. We'll finish this away from prying eyes or potential witnesses. Reed gestured with his gun. Move, Callahan, and don't try anything heroic. I've waited a long time to settle our score, but Mr. Pierce wants this handled cleanly. Wyatt assessed his options, finding them limited. He could risk a shot at Reed, but with the gun pressed to Abigail's back, he couldn't guarantee her safety. And outside, the sound of gunfire indicated that Maxwell and his deputies had encountered Reed's men. Help would not be coming soon. This isn't over, Pierce, Wyatt said, lowering his weapon slowly. Oh, but it is, Pierce replied with cold certainty. By morning, the last obstacles to my ownership of the silver mine will be removed. Tragic, really, a family dispute turned violent ending with multiple deaths and no clear heir to the Harper fortune. He smiled thinly. The territory can be so dangerous for the unprepared. As Reed moved forward to take Wyatt's gun, a new sound cut through the night, a single gunshot closer than the ongoing firefight outside. Reed hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. In that moment of distraction, Abigail acted. Despite her bound wrists, she drove her elbow hard into Reed's stomach, causing him to double over. Wyatt seized the opportunity, lunging forward to tackle Reed before he could recover. They crashed to the floor, struggling for control of Reed's weapon. Across the room, Pierce moved with surprising speed for his age, drawing a hidden derringer from his vest. He aimed not at Wyatt, but at Ezra Harper. Enough of this, Pierce snarled. I should have handled this myself from the beginning. Before he could fire, the door burst open. Deputy Carson stood there, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but his gun steady in his hand. Drop it, Pierce. Pierce hesitated only a fraction of a second before swinging his aim toward the deputy. Two shots rang out almost simultaneously, Carson's revolver and Pierce's derringer. The deputy staggered back, clutching his shoulder, while Pierce remained standing, a look of surprise crossing his features before he slowly looked down at the spreading red stain on his pristine white shirt. Impossible, he murmured, before collapsing to the floor. In the chaos, Reed had managed to break free from Wyatt, scrambling toward the door. Ezra Harper moved with unexpected agility, grabbing a heavy walking stick from beside his chair and swinging it with practiced precision. The blow caught Reed across the back of the knees, sending him crashing down once more. This time, Wyatt was ready. His fist connected solidly with Reed's jaw, stunning the man long enough for Wyatt to secure his weapon. With Reed subdued, Wyatt turned his attention to Abigail, quickly cutting her bonds with his pocket knife. Are you hurt? He asked urgently. She shook her head, rubbing her freed wrists. No, they needed me alive and unharmed to sign the documents. Her gaze moved to where Carson was now checking Pierce, who lay motionless on the floor. Is he dead? Carson confirmed grimly. Bullet caught him right in the heart. A strange quiet settled over the room, the sudden absence of Pierce's dominating presence creating a vacuum that none of them quite knew how to fill. Outside, the gunfire had ceased, suggesting the confrontation between Maxwell's deputies and Reed's men had reached its own conclusion. Ezra Harper approached his daughter cautiously, uncertainty evident in every line of his face. Abigail, She held up a hand, stopping him. Not now, Father. There will be time for explanations later. Her gaze shifted to Wyatt, a question in her eyes. Wyatt nodded, understanding her unspoken request. They needed time to process everything that had happened, everything they had learned. The revelation of their shared blood was too momentous to address in the aftermath of violence. Maxwell Hawkins appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a professional eye. Everyone all right, Carson? That shoulder needs attention. I'll live, Sheriff, the young deputy replied stoically. What about outside? Two of Reed's men dead, the rest surrendered. Maxwell's gaze fell on Reed, now sitting sullenly against the wall, blood trickling from his split lip. I see you've secured the ringleader. He'll stand trial for kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy. Wyatt said, the weight of everything that had happened in the past days finally settling on his shoulders, and for his role in my brother's death during the war. Reed looked up, hatred burning in his eyes. You've got nothing on me, Callahan. It's my word against yours. No, Abigail countered, producing the torn pages from Reed's journal that she had managed to keep hidden during her captivity. It's your word against your own written confession. As Maxwell took charge of the scene, instructing his deputies to secure Reed and tend to Carson's wound, Wyatt found himself standing beside Ezra Harper, both men watching Abigail as she spoke quietly with Maxwell. She has her mother's strength, Harper observed softly. Josephine would be proud of her. What happened to her? Wyatt asked, the question that had haunted him for a decade finally finding voice. To my mother. Harper's weathered face creased with genuine sorrow. She discovered the truth about what Pierce had done to your father. Confronted him, threatened to expose him. He shook his head slowly. She disappeared the next day. Pierce claimed she had returned east, but I never believed it. I searched for years, but never found a trace. You think Pierce killed her? It wasn't a question, but Harper nodded anyway. I do. It was after her disappearance that I began to understand the true extent of what Pierce was capable of. By then, it was too late. He had too much power, too many connections. All I could do was protect Abigail and bide my time, hoping someday to find proof. Wyatt absorbed this in silence, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. His mother had not abandoned her sons willingly. She had tried to right the wrong done to her first husband and paid the ultimate price. The knowledge brought a strange mixture of pain and peace, closure to a wound that had festered for too long. What happens now? He asked finally. Harper looked at him directly, the resemblance to Abigail striking in the set of his jaw and the directness of his gaze. That depends on you and on Abigail. There's a lot to discuss, a lot to understand. He hesitated. I can never make right what happened to your father or to Josephine, but perhaps there's a way forward that honors their memory. Before Wyatt could respond, Maxwell approached, his expression serious. We need to get back to town. Doc Perkins will want to look at Carson's shoulder, and I've got prisoners to secure. He glanced between Wyatt and Harper. Whatever else needs to be said between you can wait until morning. It's been a long night for everyone. As they prepared to leave the ranch house, Abigail came to stand beside Wyatt, her presence a tangible reminder of the unexpected connection they now shared. Brother, she said softly, testing the word. It will take some getting used to. For both of us, Wyatt agreed. But we have time. She nodded, a small smile touching her lips despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Yes, thanks to you we have time. Outside, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, pale light spilling across the landscape, transforming the harshness of the desert into something almost beautiful. A new day, Wyatt reflected, looking toward where Abigail and Ezra Harper were mounting horses provided by Maxwell's deputies. A new beginning perhaps for all of them. The wheel that had been set in motion with Abigail's rescue had come full circle, revealing truths long buried and connections never imagined. What would come next remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, Wyatt Callahan faced the future with something approaching hope. The past could not be changed, but perhaps it could at last be laid to rest. The morning sun climbed high over Sycamore Springs, bathing the town in golden light that belied the tension still lingering in the aftermath of the previous night's events. Wyatt stood at the window of Sheriff Hawkins' office, watching as townspeople went about their business, with the cautious air of those who sense a storm has passed but remain wary of its return. Behind him, Maxwell Hawkins scratched his signature on the last of several documents, the scratch of pen on paper the only sound in the small office. Reed and his surviving men had been securely locked in the jail cells at the rear of the building, awaiting transfer to the territorial prison. Solomon Pierce's body lay in the undertaker's parlor, the circumstances of his death already becoming the subject of whispered speculation throughout the town. That's the last of the official statements, Maxwell announced, setting down his pen with a sigh. The circuit judge won't be through for another 2 weeks, but this should be enough to hold Reed and his men until then. Wyatt nodded, turning from the window. And Pierce's son, James, left town before dawn, according to my deputies. Probably headed for Denver or San Francisco with whatever he could carry. Maxwell leaned back in his chair. The man's not a fool. He knows his father's empire won't survive this scandal. What about the charges against him? He was involved in this too. Not enough evidence to hold him, unfortunately. The journal pages implicate his father and Reed, but not him directly. Maxwell's expression was resigned. That's how it often goes with men like the Pierces of this world. The lieutenants fall while the heirs walk away clean. Wyatt accepted this with grim acknowledgement. Justice was rarely perfect in the territories, especially when wealth and influence were involved. At least Reed would face a reckoning for his crimes, both recent and long past. Have you spoken with Harper and his daughter this morning? Maxwell asked, changing the subject. Not yet. Wyatt moved to the window again, his gaze drifting toward the hotel where Abigail and her father had taken rooms for the day. Thought it best to give them some time. Maxwell studied his friend with knowing eyes. Quite a revelation finding out Ezra Harper's daughter is your half-sister. Changes things, I imagine. Changes everything, Wyatt admitted quietly. The door opened, admitting Deputy Carson, his left arm in a sling, but otherwise recovered from the previous night's wound. Sheriff Mr. Harper and Mrs. Reed are here to see Mr. Callahan. Maxwell nodded. Show them in, then take a break, Carson. You've earned it. As the deputy left, Wyatt steeled himself for the conversation ahead. Despite the hours that had passed since the revelation at the ranch house, he had yet to fully process what it meant that Abigail, a woman he had initially rescued out of reluctant duty and later protected out of growing respect, shared his blood through the mother he had believed had abandoned him. Ezra Harper entered first, his imposing height slightly stooped with age, but his bearing still proud. He had exchanged his travel-worn clothes for a fresh suit, his silver hair and beard neatly trimmed. Behind him came Abigail, similarly refreshed, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the striking color of her eyes, at Josephine's eyes, Wyatt now realized. Sheriff Hawkins, Mr. Callahan, Harper greeted them formally. Thank you for seeing us. Maxwell rose from his desk. I'll give you folks some privacy. I need to check on the prisoners anyway. With a supportive nod to Wyatt, he left the office, closing the door behind him. An awkward silence descended, three people connected by blood and tragedy, but separated by decades of misunderstanding and absence. Finally, Harper broke the impasse. I owe you an explanation, Wyatt, he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of long-held regret. About your mother. About everything. Wyatt gestured to the chairs facing Maxwell's desk. I'm listening. They sat, Harper gathering his thoughts, while Abigail watched both men with quiet intensity. I met your mother long before she married your father, Harper began. We were young in love, but her family disapproved of me, a rough miner with big dreams but empty pockets. He smiled faintly at the memory. Her father sent her east to separate us. By the time she returned 2 years later, I had moved on, believing she had chosen her family's wishes over our future. She met Patrick soon after your father was everything I wasn't: educated, well-spoken, from a respected family. They married, had your brother Daniel, then you. Harper's gaze dropped to his hands, weathered by years of work despite his eventual wealth. I built my own life, my own fortune. Married a woman I respected but never truly loved. When she died in childbirth, along with our infant son, I threw myself into my work even more intensely. That's when I encountered Patrick again. The silver mine, Wyatt said. Harper nodded. We both had claims in the same area. Rather than fight, we decided to partner. It was a good arrangement. Your father had the technical knowledge, I had the practical experience. We needed capital to develop the mine properly, which is why we brought in Solomon Pierce. And my mother, how did she come back into your life? A shadow crossed Harper's face. Josephine and I encountered each other at a social gathering in town. The connection between us was still there, buried, but not extinguished. We fought it, both of us. She was devoted to Patrick and you boys. He sighed heavily. But Pierce saw it. He always had a talent for identifying vulnerabilities to exploit. He encouraged the affair, Abigail said quietly. It wasn't a question. He created opportunities, arranged meetings that seemed coincidental. At the time, I thought it was friendship. Later, I realized it was strategy. Harper's voice hardened. While Josephine and I were reconnecting, Pierce was systematically undermining Patrick's position in the partnership, forging documents, spreading rumors, creating evidence of embezzlement that never occurred. Wyatt's jaw tightened. And you believed him? To my eternal shame, yes. Harper met Wyatt's gaze directly, refusing to hide from his culpability. I wanted to believe it because it made what was happening between Josephine and me seem less wrong. If Patrick was dishonest in business, perhaps I was not so terrible for loving his wife. When did you learn the truth? Abigail asked. Too late. Patrick had already taken his own life, destroyed by the false accusations and the knowledge of Josephine's betrayal. Harper's voice broke slightly. She was devastated, torn by guilt. She wanted to go to you boys to explain, to ask forgiveness. But Pierce convinced her it would only cause more pain, that Daniel and you were better off without the woman who had contributed to your father's death. The raw honesty of Harper's account struck Wyatt like physical blows. He had spent years constructing a narrative of his parents' lives, his father, the wronged victim, his mother, the heartless deserter. The truth, as always, was far more complex and human than his boyhood understanding had allowed. She came with me instead, Harper continued. We married quietly, moved to my ranch outside of town. She was never truly happy. How could she be, having lost so much? But when Abigail was born a year later, some light returned to her life. Abigail's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She loved me, with all her heart, Harper assured her. You were her redemption, her second chance. His expression darkened, which is why Pierce saw you as a threat even then. Why us? White asked. What was I to him? A loose end, Harper replied. As Abigail grew, her resemblance to Josephine became pronounced. Pierce worried that someone might make the connection, might start asking questions about the past, about the mine, about Patrick's death. So he kept us isolated, Abigail realized. All those years at the ranch, rarely allowed into town, no friends my age. It wasn't just your overprotectiveness, was it? Harper shook his head. Pierce insisted it was necessary for business reasons. I believed him, or told myself I did. The truth is, I was a coward. I had already lost so much, my integrity, my friend, eventually my wife. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too. What happened to my mother? Wyatt asked the question that had haunted him for a decade, finally finding voice. The truth, all of it. Harper drew a deep breath. 10 years ago, Josephine discovered documents in Pierce's office, proof that he had fabricated the evidence against Patrick. She confronted him, threatened to expose him, to tell you the truth. His voice faltered. She never came home that night. Pierce claimed she had decided to return east to make a fresh start. He even produced a letter supposedly from her explaining her decision. But you didn't believe it, Abigail said softly. No, the letter was in her handwriting, but the words weren't hers. I searched for months, hired investigators. Nothing. Harper's eyes held a deep, abiding sorrow. Pierce was too powerful by then, his connections too extensive. Eventually, I had to accept that she was gone, whether by choice or more likely by Pierce's hand. Wyatt stood abruptly, moving to the window again as he struggled to contain the emotions roiling within him. His mother had not abandoned her sons willingly. She had tried in her way to make amends for the past and had likely paid for that attempt with her life. Why didn't you ever try to find us? He asked without turning. Daniel and me, if you knew the truth about our father, about our mother, why leave us to believe the worst? I did try, Harper said quietly. After Josephine disappeared, I made inquiries. Daniel had died in the war. You had joined the army as well, then vanished after your discharge. No one knew where you had gone. A note of pleading entered his voice. I should have tried harder. I know that now. But I had Abigail to protect, and Pierce watching my every move. Wyatt turned back to face them, his expression carefully controlled. And now, what happens now? Harper reached into his coat, withdrawing an envelope, which he placed on the desk. This is a deed to the silver mine signed by me, recognizing you as co-owner. It was always meant to be shared between the Callahan and Harper families. It's time to honor that original intention. Wyatt stared at the envelope without touching it. I don't want your charity, Harper. It's not charity, John, Harper insisted. It's your birthright. Your father discovered that mine. His expertise made it viable. The partnership was always meant to be equal. He's right, Wyatt, Abigail added gently. This isn't about making amends, though God knows there are amends to be made. It's about justice, about setting right a wrong that has festered for too long. Wyatt looked at her, this woman who had entered his life as a stranger and now stood revealed as family. The resemblance to Josephine was clear once you knew to look for it, not just in her eyes, but in the determined set of her jaw, the grace of her movements. His sister. The word still felt foreign in his mind. What about you? He asked Abigail. Where do you go from here? A shadow crossed her face. I'm still legally married to Victor, though I intend to remedy that as soon as possible. After that, she glanced at her father, then back to Wyatt. I don't know. The ranch has never truly felt like home, especially in recent years. Harper cleared his throat. Actually, I've been considering selling the ranch. Too many memories, not all of them good. He hesitated. I thought perhaps if you were amenable, we might develop the mine properly. As partners. The three of us. The offer hung in the air, weighted with implication. Not just a business proposition, but an olive branch, a chance to forge a new relationship from the ashes of the past. I need time, White said finally, to think, to process all of this. Of course, Harper agreed quickly. Take all the time you need. We'll be in town for a few more days, finalizing matters with Sheriff Hawkins and ensuring Reed faces justice. As they prepared to leave, Abigail approached Wyatt, hesitating before speaking. I understand if you need distance. This is overwhelming to say the least. But I hope, she paused, gathering her thoughts. I hope we might have a chance to know each other. As family. Wyatt found himself nodding despite the tumult of his emotions. I'd like that, he said, surprising himself with the truth of the words. After they left, Wyatt remained in the sheriff's office, his mind replaying the conversation in exhaustive detail. The revelations had upended everything he had believed about his past, forcing him to reconsider, not just the events that had shaped his life, but the meaning he had assigned to them. Maxwell returned, taking in Wyatt's pensive expression with a knowing look. Heavy conversation. You could say that, Wyatt replied, managing a wry smile. What will you do now? It was the question Wyatt had been asking himself since the confrontation at the ranch house. With Pierce dead and Reed headed for prison, the immediate threats were neutralized. The burning need for justice that had driven him for so long had been, if not fully satisfied, at least partially addressed. Not sure, he admitted. My ranch is probably ashes by now. Reed's men made sure of that. Maxwell leaned against his desk. You could rebuild, or... He gestured to the envelope Harper had left. Seems like you have other options now. Wyatt picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the document inside, not just paper and ink, but history legacy possibility. Need to clear my head first. Think I'll take a ride. Maxwell nodded in understanding. Take all the time you need. Town's not going anywhere. Outside, the day had warmed considerably, the streets of Sycamore Springs bustling with activity. Wyatt collected Maxwell's horse from the livery, promising to return it by nightfall, and rode east out of town. He had no particular destination in mind, only the need for space and solitude to sort through the tangle of revelations. The landscape opened before him, the rugged beauty of the Arizona territory spreading to the horizon. Wyatt rode without hurry, allowing the rhythm of the horse's movement to lull his mind into a state of reflection rather than reaction. His thoughts turned first to his mother, Josephine Callahan, a woman he had spent years resenting for her perceived abandonment. The truth of her life and likely death cast his childhood memories in a new light. He recalled her gentle hands, her warm smile, the stories she would tell at bedtime. Had there been signs of her unhappiness? Her divided heart, perhaps, but he had been too young to recognize them. Then his father, Patrick Callahan, a proud man destroyed by false accusations and betrayal. Wyatt had idolized him, carried the torch of his reputation through the war and beyond. Learning of his partnership with Harper of the silver mine, that should have been their shared legacy, brought a bittersweet pang of what might have been. Daniel, his older brother, lost to a war that had claimed so many sons. At least now Wyatt knew the full truth of his death, not just a casualty of battle, but a victim of Reed's deliberate betrayal, a betrayal orchestrated by Pierce in his ruthless elimination of all Callahan connections to the mine. And finally, Abigail, no longer just Ezra Harper's daughter or Victor Reed's unwilling wife, but his sister. The unexpected connection explained the instinctive protectiveness he had felt toward her from the beginning, a bond that transcended their brief acquaintance. Lost in thought, Wyatt rode farther than intended. The sun was beginning its westward descent when he crested a rise and found himself looking down at a small homestead nestled in a protected valley. Something about the location tugged at his memory, though he was certain he had never been here before. Curious, he guided his horse down the slope. As he approached, details became clearer. A modest house, well-maintained, but showing signs of age. A small barn, a garden plot. A wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, indicating occupation. Wyatt dismounted at a respectful distance, approaching on foot to avoid appearing threatening. He had nearly reached the front porch when the door opened, revealing an elderly woman with a shotgun held competently in weathered hands. "That's far enough, stranger," she called, her voice strong despite her apparent age. "State your business." Wyatt raised his hand slightly to show he's meant no harm. "Just passing through, ma'am. Didn't mean to trespass." The woman studied him with sharp eyes, then slowly lowered the shotgun. "You're no drifter," she observed. "Too well-dressed, too well-spoken." Her head tilted slightly. "You look familiar. Have we met?" "I don't believe so," Wyatt replied. "Name's Wyatt Callahan." The shotgun came up again in an instant. "Callahan, Patrick Callahan's boy." Stunned, Wyatt nodded. "Yes, ma'am. You knew my father." The woman's expression shifted through a range of emotions, surprise, wariness, and finally a resigned sort of acceptance. "I knew your mother better," she said finally. "Martha Weaver. I was Josephine's midwife when Abigail was born, and her friend in the years after." The coincidence was too great to be chance. "You're a long way from Sycamore Springs, Mrs. Weaver." That was the point. She sighed, lowering the shotgun again. "You'd better come inside. Seems we have things to discuss." The interior of the small house was neat and comfortable, with simple furnishings and shelves lined with books and jars of dried herbs. Martha Weaver moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone accustomed to living alone, placing the shotgun in a rack by the door before gesturing Wyatt to a chair at the kitchen table. Coffee, she offered, already moving to the stove. Thank you. Wyatt accepted instinct, telling him this encounter was significant, though he couldn't yet see how. Martha prepared the coffee in silence, her back to him. Only when she had placed two steaming cups on the table and settled across from him did she speak again. How much do you know about your mother's disappearance? She asked directly. Ezra Harper believes Pierce had her killed when she discovered evidence clearing my father's name. Wyatt replied, watching the woman's reaction carefully. Martha's expression remained neutral. That's what Ezra was meant to believe. It's what everyone was meant to believe. A cold certainty settled in Wyatt's stomach. She's alive, isn't she? Martha took a sip of her coffee, regarding him over the rim of the cup. Was at least until 6 months ago when I last heard from her. She's in California now, living under a different name. The revelation struck Wyatt like a physical blow. All these years, all the grief and anger and loss, and his mother had been alive, building a new life far from the ghosts of her past. Why, he demanded, unable to keep the hurt from his voice. Why would she let us believe she was dead? Let Harper believe Pierce had killed her. Because it was the only way to protect all of you, Martha replied calmly. Pierce had already destroyed your father. He made it clear to Josephine that if she exposed what she had learned, her children would be next, all her children. So she ran. She staged her own disappearance with my help, made it look like she had confronted Pierce and lost. Martha's weathered face softened with sympathy. It broke her heart to leave Abigail, to never see you again. But she believed you were better off without her, safer without her. Wyatt struggled to process this new information coming so soon after the earlier revelations. Does Harper know? Or Abigail? Martha shook her head. No one knows except me. And now you. She hesitated. She writes occasionally, sends money for me to pass along to families in need. Never signs her real name, never gives her exact location. Too afraid Pierce would somehow intercept the letters, track her down. Pierce is dead, Wyatt said flatly. Shot last night during a confrontation at a ranch house east of Sycamore Springs. Martha's eyes widened, her composure cracking for the first time. Dead? You're certain. I saw it happen. There's no mistake. A new possibility dawned on Wyatt. She could come home now. There's nothing to fear anymore. Home to what? Martha asked gently. To a husband who believed her dead for a decade, to children grown into adults who might never forgive her abandonment. She shook her head. Some ghosts are better left buried, Wyatt. But Wyatt wasn't so sure. His mind was already racing, considering the implications. If Josephine was alive, didn't Harper and Abigail deserve to know? Didn't she deserve the chance to explain her choices directly, to seek forgiveness, if that's what she wanted? Where in California, he asked. Martha studied him, clearly weighing how much to reveal. A small town north of San Francisco. She goes by the name Sarah Jenkins now, runs a boarding house for young women. She paused. What do you intend to do with this information? It was a fair question, one Wyatt wasn't entirely sure he could answer. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I believe in truth, Mrs. Weaver. However painful, it's better than living with lies. Even when the truth might cause more harm than good, Martha challenged. Josephine made her choice believing it was the only way to protect her family. Are you certain reopening those wounds is wise? Wyatt had no immediate response. The revelation of his mother's survival had shifted the ground beneath his feet once again, leaving him uncertain of the path forward. Part of him wanted to ride immediately for California to confront the woman who had let him believe her dead, to demand explanations face to face. Another part recognized the wisdom in Martha's caution. Sometimes old wounds were better left undisturbed. Think carefully, Martha advised, seeing his conflict. Whatever you decide affects more lives than just your own. They talked a while longer, Martha sharing carefully edited stories of Josephine's life with Harper and young Abigail. She had been a good mother, by all accounts, devoted to her daughter, while carrying the weight of her complicated past. The picture that emerged was of a woman caught between impossible choices, trying to do right by those she loved, despite the consequences to herself. As the afternoon waned toward evening, Wyatt thanked Martha for her hospitality and candor. How did you come to be out here, so far from town? He asked as he prepared to leave. Pierce had long fingers, she replied simply. After Josephine disappeared, it became clear he suspected my involvement. Rather than risk his attention, I sold my practice and moved where he wouldn't think to look. A small smile touched her lips. I still deliver babies occasionally for the homesteaders hereabouts. Some callings don't leave you no matter how far you run. Wyatt mounted his borrowed horse, tipping his hat to the remarkable woman who had preserved his mother's secret for a decade. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. Martha nodded, her expression serious. Whatever you decide, be gentle with her, Wyatt. Josephine has carried her regrets like stones around her neck for many years. The ride back to Sycamore Springs gave Wyatt ample time to consider his next steps. The sun was setting as he reached town, painting the western sky in dramatic hues of orange and purple. He returned Maxwell's horse to the livery as promised, then made his way to the hotel where Abigail and Harper were staying. He found them in the hotel's small dining room sharing a quiet meal. Both looked up in surprise as he approached their table. Wyatt, Abigail greeted him warmly. We didn't expect to see you again so soon. Something's happened, he said without preamble. Something you both need to know. Harper gestured to an empty chair. Join us, please. Wyatt sat gathering his thoughts before speaking. This revelation would change everything for them, just as it had for him. He needed to approach it with care. I went for a ride today to clear my head, he began. Ended up at a homestead about 10 miles east of here. The woman living there recognized me, said I looked like my father. Harper and Abigail exchanged glances, clearly sensing the gravity of whatever Wyatt was building toward. Her name is Martha Weaver. She was a midwife in Sycamore Springs years ago. She delivered you, Abigail. Wyatt took a deep breath. She was also a friend to Josephine, our mother. Martha, Abigail repeated softly. I remember her. She used to bring herbs for mother's headaches. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Why would she be living so far from town? Because she helped Josephine disappear 10 years ago, Wyatt said quietly, and she needed to be beyond Pierce's reach afterward. The implication hung in the air for a moment before Harper grasped it, his face paling. Josephine is alive. Wyatt nodded, living in California under an assumed name. According to Martha, she staged her own disappearance to protect her family, all of us, from Pierce. He had threatened to do to her children what he had done to her husband if she exposed what she knew about my father's innocence. Abigail pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. All this time, I thought she was dead. Father said, I believed she was. Harper interrupted, his voice hollow with shock. Pierce implied, I assumed. He looked at Wyatt, anguish evident in his expression. Where is she now? Is she well? North of San Francisco, running a boarding house for young women. Martha heard from her 6 months ago. Wyatt hesitated before adding, she doesn't know Pierce is dead. She's still living in fear, still hiding. We have to tell her, Abigail said immediately. Let her know she can come home. Harper's expression was more complex, a mixture of hope and uncertainty. After 10 years, would she even want to? So much has changed. We've all changed. We won't know unless we try, Abigail insisted. She turned to Wyatt. You'll help us find her, won't you? The question gave Wyatt pause. This morning he had still been processing the revelation that Abigail was his half-sister, that Harper was connected to him through more than just a shared tragedy. Now they were discussing a journey to California to find a woman who had chosen to leave them all behind. It was moving too fast, emotions outpacing reason. I think we all need time to consider what this means, he said carefully. This isn't a decision to make in haste. Harper nodded slowly. Wyatt's right. We should proceed with caution. He looked at his daughter with gentle understanding. I know how much this means to you, Abigail, but we must think of Josephine too. Her life in California, whatever it is, represents a choice she made. We should respect that enough to approach carefully. Abigail's initial enthusiasm dampened, replaced by thoughtful consideration. You're both right, of course. It's just to know she's alive after all this time. She blinked back tears. It changes everything. Yes, Wyatt agreed quietly. It does. They talked late into the evening, sharing memories of Josephine from their different perspectives. Wyatt from his childhood before her departure with Harper. Abigail from her early years at the ranch. Even Harper contributed, though, with a certain restraint, born of lingering guilt over his role in the events that had led to such profound separations. By the time they parted for the night, a tentative plan had formed. They would wait until Victor Reed's fate was officially decided by the circuit judge. Then if all agreed it was the right course, Wyatt and Abigail would travel to California together, while Harper remained to oversee the initial development of the silver mine. They would approach Josephine gently with no expectations, only the news of Pierce's death and the opportunity to reunite with her children if she wished. As Wyatt walked back to his room at the boarding house, the weight of the day's revelation settled over him like a physical presence. His mother alive. A sister discovered. A potential partnership that might in some small way honor his father's legacy. It was more change than he had experienced in the entire decade since the war, all compressed into a matter of days. Sleep eluded him as he lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the man he had been solitary, driven by old grudges, anchored to the past, with the man's circumstances were forcing him to become. The changes felt fundamental, altering not just his understanding of his history, but his conception of his future. Dawn was breaking when Wyatt finally drifted into restless sleep, his dreams filled with faces both familiar and strange. Daniel as he had been before the war, young and full of promise. His father in the workshop, where he had taught Wyatt to carve wood. His mother as he remembered her, and as he imagined she might be now. Abigail as both the wounded woman he had rescued and the sister he was only beginning to know. When he woke mid-morning, a decision had crystallized in his mind, emerging from the subconscious work of sleep. Before any journey to California, before any further entanglement with Harper's proposed partnership, there was something he needed to do, a pilgrimage of sorts to honor the past, before embracing whatever future might be taking shape. After a quick breakfast, he sought out Maxwell Hawkins, finding the sheriff at his desk reviewing paperwork. "I need to borrow a horse for a few days," Wyatt said without preamble. "Got something I need to take care of." Maxwell looked up, studying his friend's face. "Everything all right?" "Will be," Wyatt replied. "Just need to settle some things in my own mind before moving forward." Understanding dawned in the sheriff's eyes. "Your ranch," Wyatt nodded. "Need to see what's left, say proper goodbyes." "Take whatever you need," Maxwell offered. "When will you tell Harper and Mrs. Reed?" "Already have. Stopped by the hotel on my way here." It had been a brief conversation, Wyatt explaining his need for closure, Abigail understanding immediately, Harper respectfully accepting. "They'll wait for me before making any further plans." An hour later, Wyatt rode west out of Sycamore Springs, a pack horse trailing behind with supplies for several days' journey. The familiar landscape unfolded before him, each landmark a signpost on the road home, or what had been home for a time. The trip took 2 days, Wyatt camping under the stars rather than seeking accommodation at the scattered homesteads along the way. He welcomed the solitude, using the hours of riding to organize his thoughts, to examine the tangled threads of past and present that fate had suddenly pulled tight. By the time he crested the final rise overlooking his small ranch, Wyatt had achieved a measure of peace with the tumultuous revelations. Whatever came next, he would face it with clear eyes and an open heart, a stance that would have been impossible for the bitter, closed-off man he had been before finding Abigail in the desert. As expected, the ranch buildings had been reduced to charred remnants, Reed's men having been thorough in their destruction. Wyatt dismounted, approaching the ruins of the cabin he had built with his own hands. Strange, he thought, how little grief he felt at the sight. The physical structures were gone, but they had only ever been shelter, not home in the truest sense. He spent the day examining the property, salvaging what little remained intact, a few tools buried in the root cellar, a chest containing Daniel's letters from the war, and his father's pocket watch, miraculously preserved beneath the collapsed floor. Small treasures, but significant in their connection to the past, he was now preparing to honor rather than avenge. As the sun began its descent, Wyatt built a small fire near where the cabin's porch had stood. From his saddlebags, he retrieved a bottle of whiskey purchased in Sycamore Springs for this specific purpose. Pouring a measure into a tin cup, he raised it in a silent toast to the memory of his father, his brother, and the life he had built here. The ritual complete, he settled back against his saddle, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow he would begin the journey back to Sycamore Springs, to Abigail and Harper, to the decisions that would shape whatever came next. But tonight was for remembrance, for acknowledging the path that had led him here. In the quiet of the desert night, with only the crackling fire and distant coyote calls for company, Wyatt found himself thinking of Josephine, not with the anger that had colored his memories for so many years, but with a new understanding born of Harper's explanations and Martha's revelations. She had made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, trying to protect those she loved in the only way she knew how. Could he forgive her? He wasn't sure. But he was ready to listen, to hear her side of the story directly, rather than through the filters of others' perceptions. As for Harper, the man whose partnership with his father had set so much in motion, Wyatt found his feelings equally complex. There was no denying Harper's role in Patrick Callahan's downfall, however unintentional it might have been. Yet there was also no denying his genuine remorse, his attempts to make amends, his love for Abigail, Wyatt's sister. Family. The word had meant only ghosts to Wyatt for so long. Daniel lost to war, his father to suicide, his mother to abandonment. Now it held new possibility, new life. Abigail, flesh and blood, a connection to both his past and potentially his future. Perhaps even Josephine, if she could be found, if she wanted to be found. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the ruins of what had been. Wyatt added another log, watching as the flames consumed it, transforming solid matter into light and heat, and ultimately ash. There was a metaphor there, he thought, destruction as a precursor to creation, endings that enabled beginnings. Morning found him ready to depart his night of reflection, having settled something fundamental within him. As he mounted his borrowed horse for the return journey, Wyatt cast one final glance at the remains of his ranch. He would not be returning. Whatever life awaited him now lay elsewhere, perhaps in partnership with Harper at the silver mine, perhaps in California, seeking Josephine, perhaps somewhere yet unimagined. The ride back to Sycamore Springs seemed shorter somehow, the landscape more vibrant, his perceptions sharper. Wyatt found himself noticing details he had overlooked on the outward journey, the particular blue of the sky, the patterns of shadow and light across the desert floor, the call of birds announcing his passage. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing him to see the world with new clarity. He arrived in town late on the third day, dust-covered and weary, but centered in a way he hadn't been in years. After returning the horses to Maxwell's care, he made his way to the hotel where Abigail and Harper were staying. A note awaited him at the front desk requesting his presence at dinner that evening. Cleaned and changed into fresh clothes, Wyatt entered the hotel dining room to find not just Abigail and Harper waiting, but Maxwell Hawkins as well. They greeted him warmly, Abigail with a genuine smile that highlighted her resemblance to the mother they shared. "Welcome back," she said as he took his seat. "How was your journey?" "Necessary," Wyatt replied simply. "Clarifying." Harper nodded in understanding. "Sometimes we need to properly close one chapter before opening another." "Speaking of which," Maxwell interjected, "I've received word from the territorial governor. The circuit judge will be here in 3 days. Reed's trial is scheduled to begin immediately upon his arrival." "Good," Wyatt said firmly. "The sooner justice is served, the better." "There's something else," Abigail added, a note of excitement in her voice. "Father has received a telegram from San Francisco. The banking consortium has approved funding for initial development of the silver mine." Harper smiled, pride evident in his expression. "We can begin operations within the month, assuming all goes well with the trial and other matters." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Wyatt. "Have you given any thought to our proposal, the partnership?" Wyatt had in fact spent much of his solitary ride considering Harper's offer. The silver mine represented not just potential wealth, but a connection to his father's legacy, a chance to fulfill the vision Patrick Callahan had held before Pierce's machinations destroyed him. "I'm inclined to accept," he said carefully, "with conditions." Harper nodded encouragingly. "Name them." "First, complete transparency in all business dealings. No secrets, no hidden agendas." Wyatt's gaze was steady. "The past happened because of shadows and whispers. I won't be part of anything like that again." "Agreed without reservation," Harper replied immediately. "Second, a portion of the profits to be set aside for the families of men who died in the ambush that killed Daniel. Reed's betrayal didn't just cost me a brother, it cost many families, their sons, husbands, fathers." Harper's expression softened with respect. "A fitting tribute, consider it done." "Third," Wyatt continued, his voice quieter now, "we find my mother, together. Not to force her return, but to offer her the choice and the truth about Pierce, about all that's happened." Abigail reached across the table, placing her hand over Wyatt's. "We've already discussed this. Father and I both agree. Whatever Josephine decides she deserves to know, she's free from Pierce's shadow at last." The simplicity of her touch, the casual acknowledgement of their connection struck Wyatt deeply. Family. After so long alone, the concept was still foreign, still tender, like new skin over an old wound. "Then we have an agreement," he said, looking from Abigail to Harper. "Partners." Harper raised his glass. "To new beginnings built on a foundation of truth rather than deception." They drank to the toast, the moment carrying the weight of not just a business arrangement, but a pact of sorts, a commitment to honor the past while creating a future unburdened by its shadows. The conversation turned to practical matters, the upcoming trial, the development of the mine, the eventual journey to California to seek Josephine. As they talked, Wyatt found himself observing the dynamic between father and daughter, the evident love and respect despite their complicated history. He noted too the way Maxwell watched them all with quiet satisfaction, a man who believed in justice, seeing it unfold in unexpected ways. Later, as they walked together along Sycamore Springs' main street in the cool evening air, Abigail linked her arm with Wyatt's in a gesture that felt surprisingly natural. "Are you at peace with all of this?" she asked softly. "It's been so much so quickly." Wyatt considered the question seriously, looking up at the star-filled sky before answering. "Not entirely," he admitted. "Some wounds take longer to heal than others. But I'm hopeful, for the first time in a very long time." Abigail smiled, understanding in her eyes, Josephine's eyes. "Hope is a good place to start." They continued walking in comfortable silence, two individuals bound by blood and circumstance, by shared loss and newfound connection. Ahead lay uncertainty, Reed's trial, the development of the mine, the search for Josephine, the complex process of forging relationships where only estrangement had existed before. But tonight, under the vast Arizona sky, with the ghosts of the past finally beginning to rest, that uncertainty felt less like a burden and more like possibility. The wheel that had been set in motion with Abigail's rescue in the desert had come full circle, revealing truths long buried and connections never imagined. And in that circle, Wyatt Callahan had found not just justice for the past, but the promise of a future he had never dared to envision, a future with family, with purpose, with the chance to build something that honored all that had been lost while creating something entirely new. As they turned back toward the hotel, the distant sound of a piano drifted from the saloon, a simple melody carrying on the night air. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions. But tonight, walking beside the sister he had never known he had, Wyatt allowed himself to simply be present in this moment, a moment of transition between what had been and what might yet be. The desert stretched vast around them, indifferent as always to the small dramas of human lives. But within that indifference lay a strange comfort, the knowledge that the land endured, that it would remain long after their stories had concluded. In the face of such permanence, the wounds of the past seemed smaller, somehow more manageable, more capable of healing. Under the desert stars, with the oath of vengeance transformed into one of reconciliation, Wyatt walked forward into whatever awaited, no longer alone, no longer defined solely by loss, but connected once more to the world of the living rather than the shadows of the dead. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Research Sonnet 3.7.